Hey guys, Merry Christmas. This is my last episode of the year. I'll be on hiatus until January. Filling my head with rape and murder, it just doesn't add much to my holiday cheer, know what I'm saying? Thank you all for listening in 2021. There are now more listeners and viewers than ever. Here's hoping I'll ascend to sword and scale territory in the new year. Not only am I grateful to you all for listening, but thank you as well to those of you who donated to Patreon and PayPal. You helped me get a new computer and helped keep the whole operation afloat in other ways. By the way, if you feel like spreading a little Christmas cheer to the whole operation in the form of donations, the Patreon, like always, is located at www.patreon.com/leader1, and the PayPal donations can be sent to morganrector331@hotmail.com. Happy holidays to you all and a happy new year. I hope 2022 is pandemic free and that you make more money and have more sex if that's what floats your boat. May your New Year's bender leave you alive to drink another day. And remember, if you drink, don't drive. Only human monsters get behind the wheel of a car after getting drunk. Take care, guys, and see you in 2022. Welcome to Human Monsters. I'm Morgan Rector. When it comes to any kind of crime that involves violence against children, people demand, rhetorically or not, to know one thing. Why? What drives someone to victimize this most defenseless faction of the vulnerable sector? There are risk factors that, while not always leading to these crimes, nevertheless fail to surprise experts who see commonalities in the upbringing of these offenders. Peter Whitmore, who abducted and sexually abused several young boys, outlined the story of his childhood that does provide some answers. According to Whitmore, his mother was mentally ill and was admitted to a psychiatric facility soon after his birth. He never met his father. He claimed to have been, quote-unquote, kidnapped by his family, though he was not certain that he was related to the people who raised him. He began to suspect as much at the age of 10. He has said that he had a sister and two older brothers from his alleged family. Bruce Malcolm, director of sex offender assessments, was commissioned by the system to evaluate Peter Whitmore. To quote Malcolm, Whitmore describes a childhood history filled with sexual, emotional, and physical abuse. He also depicts events which were traumatic, tragic, convoluted, and rather confusing at times. He supports that until he was about 11 years old, he had lived a relatively happy childhood, being raised by friends of his aunt. He advises that when he was about 11 years old, his foster parents divorced. He describes them as having been good parents. He said that he next lived with a foster family in Omemee, Ontario. One Dr. Donald Clark wrote this assessment of Whitmore's psychological history in 1980. Peter very definitely presents as a very vulnerable child in need of support, not only in the academic area, but also in the social and emotional one. He handled himself fairly age-appropriately from time to time, but required frequent reassurance and support to allow him to complete the tasks requested of him. Behaviorally, There was some limit testing, which he easily responded to. He spoke very warmly of his natural mother and has convinced himself that fairly soon, in the near future, he would be residing with her. In talking with Mrs. Budd, the current foster mother, Peter has exhibited a considerable amount of frustration in adapting to normal family routine. Most of his frustration is expressed in aggressive activity, which now the family anticipates has been able to intervene quite often earlier and help Peter express himself more appropriately. Certainly, Mrs. Budd's attitude and her current management techniques leave little to critique. I feel that Peter will thrive considerably, providing the family can survive his emotional demands. I discussed this with them, the fact that Peter's behavior can be a very emotionally draining one, and therefore the family must take precautions to build up some protections for itself, so as not to have the placement deteriorate. Whitmore told Malcolm he went back to his mother's home. By then, she divorced the man believed to have been his father and remarried. His 3 siblings were living there by that time. This was not a happy time either, however. As Malcolm puts it, he describes his stepfather as having been an quote-unquote idiot who had attempted to kill him. He indicates that the family was on a camping trip and his stepfather tried to hang him. He contends that he suffered much abuse within the family and had to go into the care of the Children's Aid Society several times under the age of 16. Whitmore intimated that he had his first sexual experience while in the care of the state. He was 14 years old. His partner was 10. As Malcolm put it, he states that he had already been having sexual fantasies of young males, but this was the first time he acted on those sexual thoughts. Whitmore hated living in the home where this activity took place. To quote Malcolm, he relates that he disliked living in the receiving home of the CAS. He indicates that various quote-unquote family members put him in the hospital on at least 4 occasions due to the physical abuse. He reports that his mother began living with a man named Kevin when he was 14 or 15 years old. He described Kevin as alcoholic and a druggie. He indicates that his mother continued to ignore him and spend money. He states that he often had to, quote-unquote, eat out of a garbage can. He relates that by the age of 16, he ran away and left home for good. The next chapter of his life came across as strange and over the top, however truthful it may have been. To quote Malcolm, he states that when he left home, he eventually ended up in California. He relates that he survived by doing some acting. Also, he engaged in prostitution. He indicates that he traveled a lot, moving frequently from town to town between the United States and Canada. At the age of 17, he indicates that he went to live with his father in Alberta. Shortly after arrival, he stole his father's car and was charged accordingly by the police. He advises that he was sentenced to 30 days in a young offender facility. Whitmore was hyperactive as a child, a condition that was treated with Ritalin. Some other revelations came to light during psychotherapy. He indicates that he was hypnotized by a doctor because he was experiencing nightmares. He advises that he had recurring nightmares in which he was locked in a room in a burning house. He states that he also dreamt of being locked in a room with books and no furniture for extended periods of time. It was also during hypnosis when he revealed disturbing events involving one of his brothers. He advises he was about 9 years old. He states that he cannot recall much of his childhood, especially the sexual abuse. He suggests that one of his brothers tried to kill him on a few occasions. He relates that when he was about 13 years old, his then 15-year-old brother shot him with a BB gun. He states that his brother also tried to hang him on one occasion. He claimed to have been sexually abused by adult males, but could not disclose any specific details because he had blocked out the memories. He said his sister was not abusive in any way to him, but she would not discuss their childhood with him because she was in denial about what happened. Whitmore's education ended in grade 8. He was frequently suspended and expelled due to behavioral issues. Whitmore's past sure didn't lay the bedrock for a prosperous future. As Malcolm told it, he reports that he has had long periods of unemployment and has supported himself through social assistance, occasional prostitution, and frauds, although he suggests the frauds were committed more for the thrill of not getting caught. Whitmore claimed to have attempted suicide 3 to 4 times since 1994. He described the methods to Malcolm, who reported, he indicates that he generally makes an attempt while he is in custody and before he is actually sentenced for conviction. He relates that on one occasion he scraped the paint off his cell wall, drank it, and also consumed 18 pencils. He advises he thought he would perish of lead poisoning, but obviously did not. In the end, he states that it all just made him feel physically ill and just, quote, yucky, unquote. He reports that in the other instances, he did not really make an attempt, but gathered sheets in preparation of hanging himself. He states that he has not been experiencing any suicidal ideations presently. Whitmore claimed to have married a Los Angeles policewoman. He was 16 years old and she was 22. He was still a street hustler when they met, as Malcolm noted. He indicates he got married to, quote, get away from everybody, end quote. He states that their sexual activity was short-lived, however. A child was produced from such activity. Their son is presently 10 years old and living with, quote, some friends, end quote. Whitmore relates that he has regular contact with his son, who is apparently residing with a gay male couple. He claims that he has not had any sexual thoughts of his son. On the contrary, he seemed rather disgusted at the notion. When asked about what had become of his marriage, Whitmore said he remained on good terms with the woman. He said that though she was an officer of the law, she was understanding regarding his problem of being sexually attracted to boys. She died in 1989 when her car drove off a cliff. Whitmore contradicted himself during the many interviews he did with Dr. Malcolm. For instance, he claimed to have fathered up to 3 children. He said one of the mothers was only 14 years old at the time of their child's birth. Whitmore felt he was treated unfairly by the justice system. He said his sentences were too harsh, especially the ones he received for his most recent offenses. To quote Malcolm, he suggests there are sexual offenders worse than he that receive considerably less time for much more intrusive sexual acts. September 10th, 1993, Toronto, Ontario. This was the day that Peter Whitmore, at the age of 18, pled guilty to charges of child sexual abuse. The first victim was an 11-year-old boy. They had a lot in common in terms of coming from broken families and being bandied about in the foster system. They were poisoned by self-loathing and low self-esteem. Whitmore began by paying the boy small amounts of money for oral sex, fondling, and masturbation. Whitmore insisted there was nothing wrong with this conduct, while proffering himself as a confidant and friend. The Crown Attorney suspected that this boy was not Whitmore's only victim, but there was no evidence to substantiate the claim of a higher victim tally. Whitmore's sexual abuse of children began to escalate in March 1993. He went to the Douglas Snow Aquatic Center in North York. He knew it would be well attended by children. He brought an accomplice, a boy he met on the streets. After searching for potential victims, they settled on an 11-year-old boy. Whitmore came up with an idea. He would approach the boy and ask him if he wanted to make some easy money. He told him he needed assistance delivering a package to an apartment block nearby. He told him it wouldn't take long, and he could come right back to the pool afterwards. When the three boys arrived at the apartment block, they brought the boy to a storage room in the basement. They spent the next several hours sexually assaulting the boy. They performed oral sex and masturbation on him, causing him to ejaculate 3 times. Whitmore tried to sodomize him, but failed. Their victim's parents went to police when they went to collect him at the pool and found he wasn't there. A missing person bulletin was issued to officers throughout the province of Ontario. Whitmore allowed the boy to leave the next morning. He warned him against telling anyone what happened. Whitmore and his accomplice approached another 11-year-old boy, this time on the streets of downtown Toronto, a few days later. Without giving him some kind of cover story, he told the boy he would pay him $100 for oral sex. He suggested they adjourn to the same basement storage room where he raped his last victim. The boy thought better of it and ran off. Whitmore let that one go, but he would stop at nothing to find a suitable target. He took to the streets alone now, and he spotted a 12-year-old boy who was to his liking later that month. He lured him to the basement storage room using the same ruse about the delivery job. Whitmore informed the boy that they would have to do a walkthrough of the job as a sort of test to see if he was suited to the job. After getting him alone, he grabbed the boy's crotch. He tried to pull down his pants. The boy got scared and ran away. His last victim was a 13-year-old paper boy. Whitmore offered him $700 a week to be his personal sex slave. Whitmore said he wanted oral sex on the regular. The boy agreed, though with some reluctance. The boys arranged a follow-up meeting. Before this transaction could take place, the police tracked down Peter Whitmore. They had received descriptions from his previous victims and would now likely recognize the offender. Whitmore didn't disguise his appearance, which made the process easy for investigators. Peter Whitmore was found in the Ontario town of Sault Ste. Marie a few days later and was taken into custody. When he was brought before the court, Peter Whitmore was charged with several sex offenses. He didn't deny responsibility. He was very open with police about his crimes. He even confessed about victims that did not report the incidents to police. Whitmore didn't know their names or any other important details, so the police were not able to follow up on this information. He pleaded guilty to an abduction of a person under the age of 14, 3 counts of sexual interference, and 2 counts of invitation to sexual touching. He was sentenced to 16 months in jail. This was in addition to the 6 months of pretrial custody he had already served. The judge gave him 3 years of probation with strict conditions, including sex offender counseling. He was to have no contact whatsoever with a child under the age of 14. It was the wish of all those involved that this would mark the final occasion when Peter Whitmore would have a brush with the law. Taking the long-range view, he had only scratched the surface of what he would wreak upon the world. July 29th, 1994. Peter Whitmore understood the justice system, and he knew how to work it. He pled guilty to get the sentencing and jail time over with. He didn't fight anybody or resist anything. As long as he cooperated and served his time as a model inmate, there would be no incentive to dole out additional punishments. He would nod his head when asked about his commitment to change and his determination to turn a new leaf. The truth was, he had no intentions of changing. As repellent and infuriating as child sexual abuse is to most people, he saw no fault in his conduct and felt no remorse about the damage that was done to his victims. He saw his prison sentence as a necessary evil. After 10 months, or 2/3 of his sentence, he was released. August 10th, 1994, Guelph, Ontario. After 3 nerve-wracking days of wondering where their 8-year-old daughter was, the girl arrived back at their home by taxi. The police were contacted immediately. The taxi driver was baffled about the whole thing. It was an unusual transaction to drive a minor such a long distance and be told the mother would pick up the fare. He told the officers the story about how he picked up the child in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire hardware store in the western Toronto borough of Scarborough. A man ordered the cab and gave the driver the address to Guelph. In 2021 dollars, the cost would be about $175 before tax and tip. When police questioned the girl, they realized who was responsible: Peter Whitmore. August 11th, 1994, Toronto, Ontario. Addressing a media scrum, Detective Tom Archibald said, "Every time we turn a corner, there's another corner." The police took it upon themselves to inform the community that Peter Whitmore was at large and on the hunt for victims. He was passing out business cards to male juveniles he met on the street, claiming to be employed by an American organization called the quote-unquote Boys Town National Hotline. It was a suicide hotline for children. He offered his services as a counselor. He told them that if they had a problem, he would be there to listen. He also claimed to be the head of quote-unquote Child Protection Services, which he said was a babysitting service for at-risk youth and young adults. Naturally, it was all a ruse. He was just trying to elicit trust in these children so he could abuse them. That was how he came into the company of the 8-year-old girl from Guelph. The plan was devised by Whitmore while he was still incarcerated. He befriended an inmate named Tony Salinas. Tony told him he was soon to be released and wanted access to his infant son. Salinas didn't expect that the mother would allow this. He mentioned that they had also had an 8-year-old daughter. Nobody offers you anything in jail without a hidden agenda. Whitmore offered his assistance, citing his credentials with Child Protection Services. He said he was experienced in winning custody orders and quote-unquote seizing children on behalf of the petitioning parent. They made plans to meet on the outside after they were both released. Shortly after Whitmore was released on July 29th, he and Salinas went to court. Whitmore was a man of his word. He helped Salinas get a temporary court order that enabled him to have visitation rights with his children. Whitmore was active on both sides of the dispute, also meeting with her mother and her daughter to ensure everything was understood. The mother was upset. Whitmore offered his consolation, saying custody disputes are stressful for everyone involved. He proposed a resolution. He told her it would be a good idea to withdraw the girl from the situation for a few days. He told her children are affected the most by such battles, and the girl needed to decompress. Whitmore convinced the woman he was sincere and compassionate. She felt comforted by him. He came across as trustworthy and dependable. He sealed the deal by informing her that he was in a relationship with a woman named Terry, who had cerebral palsy. She was confined to a wheelchair and would help him take care of the girl. The mother consulted with their daughter and soon after agreed to these conditions. On August 7th, 9 days after his release from prison, he was entrusted with the custody of a child. He told the mother he would keep in touch constantly. He assured her the girl would be in good hands. Whitmore and the girl went to Whitmore's apartment in Scarborough. They arrived shortly after midnight. He told the girl she could sleep on his couch. Soon after she fell asleep, he walked up to the couch. After standing over her and taking her in, he bent over and started kissing her. When she woke, he backed away. She was frightened. Whitmore was silent. Terry was real, as promised. She slept in another room. August 9th. The girl's mother had been discussing the custody matter with Salinas. It was about this time that she learned the truth about the man with whom her daughter was staying, whether he was actually a trained counselor or not. He was a convicted child molester. Her next move was to call the number Whitmore gave her. No answer. She left a voicemail telling him to call her back immediately. She half threatened to call the police. She was hoping the situation would resolve itself without taking it that far. Whitmore called her back late in the afternoon. Both Salinas and the mother demanded that he return the girl to them. They told him that she must be at their home by 7 p.m., or else. Hours later, Whitmore and the girl had not turned up. They called his apartment multiple times without a response. They called the police. When the police went to Whitmore's house, they found Terry there alone. She said she had no idea where Whitmore was. Whitmore was on the run. He bought a small tent at a sporting goods store. The girl was at his side when he made the purchase. He took her to a campground on the outskirts of Toronto. Now that he was in a location where nobody could track him down, he abused the girl in earnest. He kissed her lips forcibly. He ordered her to perform oral sex on him, and her compliance was elicited with force. After they were finished with this, they slept together in the tent. The girl was terrified of him the entire time. She also didn't know when or if she would be returned to her mother. When Whitmore woke the next morning, he got ready to take to the road. He packed up the tent and put it in his truck. He knew police across the province would be looking for him, so he decided it was time to get rid of the girl. That's when he called for the cab and drove to Canadian Tire. Another pronouncement from Detective Tom Archibald. You can never be too careful about who is taking care of your kids. Police procured a Canada-wide warrant for Peter Whitmore's arrest. As national media coverage about Peter Whitmore and his criminal history was disseminated, a young boy with a devastating secret came forward. Peter Whitmore was his next-door neighbor for a time in the summer of 1992. The boy was 11 years old at the time. At first, Whitmore came across as friendly and outgoing. He was especially charming toward children. Parents were pleased with him, and when the boy was invited to spend the night at Whitmore's place, his parents consented. Whitmore didn't waste time. His attack began by fondling the boy's genitalia. He told him he would pay him $100 for oral sex. The boy refused, but Whitmore persisted. He continued to wave money in front of the boy's face. He molested him several times throughout the night. When the boy went home in the morning, he said nothing about the abuse. When he did finally tell them what happened, his parents called the police immediately. August 12, 1994, Shelburne, Nova Scotia. Retired police officer Doug Stewart started a hotel called the Loyalist Inn. A man came in inquiring about a room for rent. He said he was taking a look at the area after being hired by the local armed forces base. He paid for his room with a check that bore the name of an Arizona bank. More suspicious than ever, Stewart called the RCMP after the man went to his room. He requested that they run the man's name through their database. The officer said, "What is it?" Stewart said, "Peter Whitmore." Minutes later, Shelburne police discovered there was a pedophile predator in their community. When they consulted CPIC, Canadian Police Information Center, based in Ottawa, the nation's capital, they learned that there was an active warrant for Peter Whitmore's arrest. The police drove to the Loyalist Inn without delay. Whitmore was in his room alone at the time. When he saw the cruisers pulling up, he knew the heat was closing in on him. It could only be him. He ran out the front door in an effort to escape. He only ran a few meters before he was tackled and cuffed. As Peter Whitmore rotted in a holding cell, Toronto police were informed about his arrest. The families of his two most recent victims were relieved. A news bulletin was released by law enforcement, thanking everyone who assisted with tips and reports of sightings. A search warrant was issued to police so they could search Peter Whitmore's apartment. Among the items found: 15 binders containing photos torn from catalogs, 9 of boys' modeling clothing and swimsuits, 1 similar binder containing images of girls, and 2 binders of children of both sexes wearing similar outfits. 3 binders filled with travel brochures. Documents for children protection services, including receipts for business supplies. A large collection of posters of child celebrities in movies and TV shows. A book called TV-Free Activities You Can Do With Your Child. Numerous self-help books about parenting and children. A book entitled The Doctor's Book of Home Remedies for Children. A guide for non-prescription drugs. April 5th, 1995, Scarborough, Ontario. Peter Whitmore appeared in court. His lawyer convinced him that the best move he could make was to adorn a facade of being remorseful. He was also advised not to fight the allegations. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of sexual interference and an invitation to sexual touching. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. It was a product of a joint proposal from the Crown Attorney and the defense. Whitmore had given a confession after his arrest in Nova Scotia. This arrangement was made to spare the victims the experience of testifying in court and being cross-examined. Whitmore was ordered by the judge to stay away from children permanently. He was also forbidden from getting a job that might bring him into contact with children. She recommended counseling, as another judge had. She said, "I strongly recommend sexual offender assessment and treatment as soon as possible, and I am certainly hopeful that will meet with the desired effect of such a recommendation. But I would also like to indicate that any application for parole is to be seriously questioned if you do not take the treatment that is required and is very sorely needed in the court's view." He hid it well, but Peter Whitmore was beyond redemption. There was no cure for his condition, but death. A cellmate remarked on some of Whitmore's behavior in prison, things he'd witnessed from Whitmore. "All I want him to do is get help. I know he needs help." He would stand 6 inches from the TV and stare at kids. He would even touch the screen where the kids' private parts were. I remember one time he told me women were nothing but trouble. Bruce Malcolm wrote the following in a report reflective of his findings in August 1995. Whitmore does not view the children involved in his sexual offenses, past or present, as victims. He views them all as willing participants due to either genuinely liking him or because he paid for their sexual services. He advises that he does not consider performing fellatio on the victims as an intrusive sexual act. Consequently, he did not feel that victims had been affected negatively by sexual activity. He concedes he has a problem, but perhaps he views it more as a legal problem, certainly not a moral one. During the assessment, Whitmore was asked about specific victims. As far as the 11-year-old boy, he said he was, quote-unquote, going out with the boy's older brother at the time. He said the victim, quote, demanded, end quote, that he perform fellatio on him, or else he would tell his mother that Peter was having sex with his brother. Malcolm concluded, based on this, that Whitmore did not view the 11-year-old as a victim. Whitmore denied his abuse of the little girl, saying, "Why would I? I like boys." He said she became, quote, easily confused, end quote, as if the conflict between her mother and father left her so disoriented that she confused Peter Whitmore's conduct with something far more pernicious. As far as his first victims went, he said the boys came to the situation with sexual experience, and that he wasn't doing anything new with them. He insisted that force never entered into the equation, and that the sexual acts were always consensual. He said, "I didn't take them off the streets and rape them." He said the 11-year-old boy he held for almost 24 hours looked older, about 14. His explanation? Boys from Bosnia look older. Malcolm relates what Whitmore told him about the other victims. He advises that he has had about 10 or 11 what he considers to be relationships with boys mainly under the age of 12. He indicates that he has tried to remain with a child after he was 12 years old, but found it difficult. He states that he did manage to stay with one boy from age 12 to 16. He relates that he has engaged in sexual acts with these boys, ranging from fondling to fellatio to acts of anal intercourse. Later in the interview, he reported that he is more interested in being affectionate, hugging and kissing with boys under the age of 12, and performing fellatio on those males who are aged 12 and over. He reports that he has had adult male sexual partners, but only due to his prostituting. He relates that he did not enjoy the sexual activity with adult males, but did so out of necessity. He states that it is more realistic for him to be attracted to young females, aged 12 to 16, and then make the leap from young females to adult females. He indicates that in his leisure time, he enjoys collecting photographs. Apparently, he had 50,000 photographs in his home when he was arrested. He suggests that very few of those pictures were of children. However, he advises that he was doing an experiment in which he was taking photos of many children from different ethnicities. He reports that he was very interested in seeing how different male children aged over the years, specifically between the ages of 4 and 17. It is noteworthy to mention that he states he reads certain literature that depicts an adult's experiences sexually assaulting children. He relates that he prefers true stories. Whitmore intimated that he continued to look for victims while in prison. Lately, he has taken to writing numerous pen pals. He obtained names of pen pals from a list of individuals who are gay. He relates that he discovered, apparently by accident, that one of these males whom he writes has a sexual preference for young boys. He admits to having quite a curiosity about other males who sexually assault children. He contains that he is still learning about himself, and that he feels that he can learn from others who have a similar preference. He indicates that although he has not acted on sexually assaulting, rather aggressively, quite young children, he takes a certain amount of pleasure or enjoyment from reading about others who have. It would seem that many of Whitmore's activities, whether for leisure or job-related, revolve around access to young males. He states that he had been a Cub Scout leader and claims to have never sexually assaulted any of the boys he came into contact with. He reports that prior to his arrest, he was writing nasty stories. He indicates that he was writing child pornography stories. Also, he states that he was helping a friend choose children for a movie. He contends that the movie was not of a pornographic nature. He relates that he had taken child psychology courses to better understand children. He also reads books about children who have been sexually abused. He was unable to describe himself in general, but he advises that he likes to spend money, specifically on other people, children. While in prison, Peter Whitmore refused to undergo sex offender counseling. He showed interest in upgrading his education and says he completed his grade 12, though the administration were pretty sure he was full of shit. In 1997, guards found pictures of children in Whitmore's cell. They were cut from magazines and stored in books. Many of the pictures of girls were from a children's exercise book that featured little girls in leotards and other workout clothes. Pictures were removed from National Geographic that contain images of naked boys from third world countries. The administration took action immediately. He was evaluated by one Dr. C. Smiley. The following are quotes from his report. This discovery of images was determined to be significant in light of the fact Mr. Whitmore is a convicted sex offender whose victims are children. The writer determined that Mr. Whitmore was probably using these pictures to generate sexual fantasies about children. This would indicate that he was at a high risk for entering his crime cycle, and for continuing to reinforce his inappropriate sexual responding to children. Mr. Whitmore immediately adopted a defensive attitude and denied that the pictures were his. Mr. Whitmore appeared to be extremely agitated and angered by the allegations that the pictures were in fact his and that he was using the pictures for sexual gratification. Mr. Whitmore acknowledged that he had other materials, such as a Sears catalog, which contained pictures of young children in revealing attire, example underwear, leotards, etc. He stated that he used the catalog only for ordering items and denied using the pictures for sexual gratification. Dr. Smiley made a proposal to Whitmore. The writer proposed to Mr. Whitmore that perhaps he would be willing to demonstrate his motivation for change by removing all of the pages containing children from the catalog, as it was determined that he had no intentions of ordering a children's clothing. He angrily refused to do this, stating that it would be, quote-unquote, destruction of property. This poorly thought-out response demonstrated his determination and commitment to maintaining access to pictures of young children. Consequently, this incident has demonstrated that Mr. Whitmore's current motivation for treatment is poor. Smiley's recommendation was to have Whitmore moved to a sex offender facility. To quote Smiley, Mr. Whitmore has yet to realize that the onus for change rests with him, and that he is responsible for demonstrating to others that he is actively working towards eliminating any behavior which contributes to his crime cycle. Example, in this instance, keeping and viewing pictures of children. Further, in order to demonstrate sufficient motivation for change, it is imperative that he respond constructively to reasonable requests regarding any high-risk behaviors. Example, regarding the Sears catalog. Consequently, this incident has demonstrated that Mr. Whitmore's current motivation for treatment is poor. Whitmore was transferred to the Regional Health Center in British Columbia. He was enrolled in its intensive treatment program for sex offenders. His lack of interest in being treated and deprogrammed was blatantly obvious. Evidence of this was demonstrated just a few days after his arrival in April 1997. The facility was holding an open house, whereupon inmates could socialize with family members without the usual restrictions. Nobody visited Peter Whitmore that day, but he was intent on mingling. Once the day was over, the staff found out that Whitmore approached two young children who were there to visit their father. He gave each of them a hug. The boys were interviewed. An officer's statement observation report was placed in Whitmore's file. As program therapist Jacqueline Dargay noted, it was brought to the attention of the writer that Peter Whitmore befriended two young boys. He was excited by this and expressed his desire to meet them again, and, in fact, he purchased a picture of this family from the patient they were visiting. He didn't leave it at that. There was another attempt by Whitmore to get access to illicit materials that involved two other inmates. To quote Dargay, he had approached a group member for a picture of his grandson and offered to send kiddie porn through the guise of a lawyer's letter to another group member. Finally, he had admitted using pictures from the library to fuel his fantasies. For these infractions, he was sent to Millhaven Institution in Ontario, which houses some of Canada's worst offenders, like Paul Bernardo. May 15, 1998. This date marked the point at which Whitmore would have served a third of his sentence. It also meant that, unless his conduct suggested it was too much of a risk, he would have a shot at being paroled. If the Correctional Service of Canada advised against it, he was sure to serve the rest of his sentence. Clinical psychologist Jerome Franzblow made this pronouncement. Mr. Whitmore is a young man with serious credibility problems due to his lying and who represents a significant risk to children as an untreated sex offender. He is currently displaying active signs of attraction to children, especially males within the institution. The following are quotes from findings in a report written by Millhaven caseworker Scott Meyer. Hyper-alert, superficially cooperative, demanding of outside referrals, speaks quickly, no psychomotor disturbance, no thought form disorder, eurythmic, gives glib and superficial responses to a number of questions, such as April 1992 offenses were due to trial and error, and I always buy my friendships. Grandiose regarding his criminal activities. No suicidal/homicidal ideation. Quite bright. Cognitively intact. Though Whitmore denied the hugging incidents to prison staff, he confessed to another inmate that not only had he done it, but that he was aroused by the physical contact he had with the children in question. One thing prison officials gleaned was that he had approached a minimum of 4 inmates asking for photographs of their children. Whitmore admitted to being a chronic liar without credibility. January 30th, 1998. The day of Peter Whitmore's appearance before the parole board, taking his history in and outside of prison into consideration. They pronounced, "The board is satisfied that, if released, you are likely to commit a sexual offense against a child prior to expiration of your sentence, and therefore orders you detained." His parole was denied at this time. In December 1998, Peter Whitmore finally agreed to undergo treatment in the high-intensity sexual offender program that was facilitated at the Ontario Regional Psychiatric Centre. He soon lost interest and withdrew his cooperation. He gave up after 3 group sessions. He cited shortcomings of the staff, like quote-unquote lack of honesty and inadequate credentials. August 17, 1999. A package arrived at the offices of the Toronto Police Service. It was sent by Jill Clark Davis, the unit manager at Warkworth Institution. She had examined Peter Whitmore throughout his sentence. From the letter, reports indicate the subject has completed a variety of educational courses during his incarceration, as well as having completed the Alternatives to Violence volunteer program in 1996. Significantly, however, Whitmore has not yet addressed his need for intensive sexual behavior treatment programming. He has been provided the opportunity on several occasions. However, he leaves the programming due to his being suspended for lying and/or lack of motivation. Prison officials had some theories about what Peter Whitmore's post-release plans might consist of. Subject indicates that he is relocating to London, Ontario, to start over in a new and smaller city. He has not yet obtained residence or employment. Whitmore also noted that he was considering moving back to British Columbia and living with his aunt. Should he have done so, he intended to receive support from community agencies. He mentioned something about a close relationship with a pastor. The prison administration wasn't buying it. Prison officials remained somewhat unconvinced his above-noted gestures are genuine, given his manipulative nature. Whitmore continues to show a lack of insight into his criminal behavior. He continues to minimize the seriousness of his offenses and/or deny them. He further asserts his interest in books, etc., containing pictures of children in various states of undress is strictly therapeutic. He shows no remorse and no victim empathy. Clark Davis's letter ended with a warning. Upon arrest, Whitmore is noted to have acknowledged assaulting other young males in various cities for several years. He is further noted to have indicated the acts were becoming more progressive in nature and, quote, that if things don't stop, more serious harm would come to these young persons, end quote. The pastor in question was one Timo Martin. As a man of the cloth, he tried not to judge Peter Whitmore and offered his services and compassion where possible. He didn't realize Whitmore was using him. At first, he got Martin to send him donations, such as a computer, a printer, a television, and a pair of headphones. Rumor has it that the first television sent to Whitmore was old, and he demanded a new model. Whitmore's aunt sent him money, which he, in turn, gave to Martin to purchase a new television. Whitmore also expressed interest in being employed by Timo Martin's church. This was strictly out of the question. Children comprised a sizable part of the congregation. There was something else Whitmore wanted from Timo Martin, and the agenda behind the request was far more pernicious. To quote Toronto Police Detective Paul Lobsinger, Whitmore has asked for Timo to send him pictures of the congregation and the children. In conclusion, Lobsinger said, Timo says that Whitmore is a friendly, likable guy and gives the impression that he's a nice person. But he says he would not have the time to look after him because he travels a lot, and that Whitmore would be alone in his house. He says that Whitmore is always after something, and that he feels he's being used. It is the belief of the writer that Mr. Whitmore has a goal of offending against children and is determined to beat the social and judicial system that is currently in place to protect those very same children. Police were preparing for Peter Whitmore's release, and they weren't taking any chances. Give this guy any amount of wiggle room, and he was sure to reoffend. In fact, in a conversation Whitmore had with someone at that time, he had said his goal was to last 2 weeks. I have just to last 2 weeks. Peter Whitmore was so determined to sexually abuse children, He decided it was worth it to spend years in prison if it meant he could spend a week or two indulging his twisted desires. This information was entered into affidavits by police. Street gangs, the Italian mafia, and the Hells Angels didn't stir up this much dread, loathing, and hypervigilance. No child was safe as long as Peter Whitmore walked the streets. Though his lifetime ban that prohibited all contact with children and the occupation of spaces frequented by children was permanent, he agreed once again to abide by those conditions upon release. The police made a strong case that Peter Whitmore must report to the Sex Crimes Unit on a weekly basis to ensure his compliance with the conditions of his parole. Should this have been put into effect, it would have required adherence nationwide. If Whitmore's conduct suggested the possibility of reoffending, the period of weekly reporting could be extended. Any police agency in Canada would be able to access information about Whitmore and his case on their internal computer systems. Whitmore was not prepared to cooperate on all levels. He agreed that though news of the peace bond should be disseminated to local schools, daycares, and community clubs, he refused to honor a pervasive community notification, which promised to cover all bases. Police suggested that one way to guarantee Whitmore's compliance was to broadcast information about his release to the general public. If the public was informed, the children would be forearmed. Whitmore protested. He said the quote-unquote widespread and indiscriminate publicity might endanger his safety and prevent his ability to re-enter society successfully. An Ontario judge approved the recommendations made by police. He said there was no other way to notify thousands of families on an individual basis. This was unprecedented. Rarely in Canada's history had an offender posed such a serious threat to a sector of the public. His release, from a moral standpoint, was a crime. December 4th, 1999. Peter Whitmore had disappeared. On a day when he was required to report to the Sex Crimes Unit, he didn't turn up. Though police were not surprised, there was something about the contempt Whitmore showed for his victims and the justice system that was supposed to protect them that left officers stunned. Timo Martin had some contact with Whitmore after his release. Whitmore persuaded him to help him rent a car. He said he wanted to get reacquainted with the streets of Toronto after all the time spent in prison. Martin reluctantly agreed to do him this favor. That was the last time Martin saw Whitmore. A Canada-wide arrest warrant was issued for the apprehension of Peter Whitmore. His disappearance became headline news. The police knew the make and model of the car. They suspected he was westbound, likely to visit his brother in Alberta or his aunt in British Columbia. They didn't know for sure, but they didn't dare rule out these possibilities. The government of Ontario called on the federal government in Ottawa to introduce a national registry for sex offenders. Solicitor General David Subucci argued that it would be an effective way for police across Canada to share information about high-risk sex offenders. He used the Whitmore's case to prove that peace bonds were not sufficient. He proposed that all registered sex offenders would have to give their addresses to police for storage in the computer database. Anybody convicted of a sex crime, anything from child pornography-related offenses to sexual assault, would be filed into the database. The file would be stored for a minimum of 10 years, or as long as 25 years. It would depend on the offender's criminal history. Breaching the registry requirements would incur, among other penalties, a $25,000 fine. Not everybody was on board with this idea. Defense attorney Julian Falconer, who represented several sex offenders throughout his career, argued that those restrictions would only drive more sex offenders into hiding. He used Whitmore as an example. To quote Falconer from an interview with the Ottawa Citizen newspaper, "The person you are most afraid of, the dangerous offender, will simply go underground." He cited statistics from similar legislation in the United States. Only 50% of such offenders were compliant. Falconer said, "If community passion is what we are going to rely upon for justice, then ultimately we will run these people out into the Arctic." He also pointed out that every offender is entitled to privacy, as indicated by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, regardless of the threat they pose to the community. The fact that the judge didn't designate Peter Whitmore a dangerous offender also drew criticism. Paul Bernardo was denied parole after serving his sentence of 25 years because of his dangerous offender status. It is usually sex offenders who are deemed dangerous offenders by the law, and once that happens, their hopes of ever being released are slim to none. Since the designation was passed into law in 1977, 279 criminals were adjudged dangerous offenders by this time, and none of them had been released. This was the heavy artillery the Canadian justice system needed to keep Peter Whitmore behind bars indefinitely. January 11th, 2000, Presidio, Chihuahua, Mexico. Peter Whitmore had come this far looking for a fresh start. It all fell apart when he filed a refugee claim. Officials were wise to him. He was arrested for entering the country illegally and violating immigration laws. He was soon deported back to Canada. After doing some digging, police discovered what Peter Whitmore's long-term plans in Mexico consisted of. He would teach English classes to children. His lawyer Dan Brodsky was quoted as saying, "If he's such a danger to the citizens of Ontario, why worry if he's in Mexico?" It also came to light that Tino Martin's compassion for Peter Whitmore cost him $6,250 in car rental fees, or about $9,339.30 in 2021 dollars. Whitmore was sentenced to a year in prison. It was an outrage as far as the public was concerned. They viewed this penalty as little more than a slap on the wrist. October 15th, 2000, Toronto, Ontario. Peter Whitmore had served 2/3 of a year-long sentence, and he was eligible for parole. Police didn't feel the public was adequately prepared for his release last time, so they took the step of publicizing what was to be his home address. Historically speaking, this was unprecedented. In applying for a Section 810 peace bond, the police wrote the following: "Mr. Whitmore has demonstrated by his previous conduct that he is a flight risk. The police need current and accurate information about Mr. Whitmore's whereabouts to ensure that he does not flee the jurisdiction with the intent of frustrating the order of the court. The protection of the community necessitates the police being able to notify any other communities of the risk that Mr. Whitmore poses to children." Dan Brodsky went to the media to proclaim his opposition to this action. "My client is terrified because he currently has an address but will be evicted should the address become public. He's concerned for his safety and the safety of the people he lives with." Justice Victor Paisley approved the new peace bond. The conditions were the same as with the previous peace bond. In addition to reporting to police every Tuesday, he was also required to disclose all romantic relationships with consenting adults to police. He had to get special consent to continue consorting with his partner if they had children under the age of 14. Dan Brodsky fought against these conditions, but those attempts were shot down. One of his concerns was that Peter Whitmore might become a victim of vigilante violence. The judge determined that such an attack was not guaranteed to occur, while there was a very high risk that Whitmore could sexually abuse a child, given his history. October 16th, 2000, Toronto, Ontario. A compromise was made. Whitmore's exact address would not be disclosed to the public, but a general warning would be issued to residents of the Eglinton and Royal York area of the city in Etobicoke. To quote Staff Inspector Ray Pilkington of the Toronto Police Sex Crimes Unit, "I think this is the best balance. I know this individual and his track record. If we released his address, he would go underground and disappear. At least this way I know where he is and could keep an eye on him. I think there is much less chance of him reoffending. This is much better than driving him out of town and passing the problem on to another community. I know people don't want him here, but at least we will know what he is doing. This way we have some control." This wasn't satisfactory for the residents of Eglinton and Royal York. There were many daycares and schools in this area. Many vowed to do some sleuthing and release Whitmore's address publicly. City Councillor Mario Giacente promised his constituents he would do so if the opportunity arose. Residents of the area began calling local radio call-in shows, and they had a lot to say about Whitmore and his presence in their community. They felt he forfeited his right to privacy once he began abusing children. Some felt he should live in his lawyer's neighborhood so Brodsky could see how comfortable he would feel with a notorious pedophile walking among his children. October 19th, 2000. Peter Whitmore faced an ultimatum. He was given 24 hours to flee the neighborhood, or the vengeful public would seek him out and carry out their own form of justice. One woman in particular made this abundantly clear to Whitmore. She had 3 children and was alarmed to discover that he lived in the house next door. Timo Martin came to Whitmore's rescue once again. Somehow nobody could convince this man that Peter Whitmore was irredeemable. Martin did lay out some stringent conditions for Whitmore this time around, however. Whitmore could stay at his home for no longer than a week. He was to find a permanent address after that time. He was also not to leave Martin's home while he was staying there. He also persuaded him to undergo intensive one-on-one counseling as a potential remedy for his deviant sexual proclivities. Martin refused to give up on the man. Jesus didn't die on the cross for the likes of Peter Whitmore, but he wasn't quick to acknowledge that reality just yet. Whitmore's feelings regarding children had taken an unexpected turn. He was, quote-unquote, scared of them because they represented a risk to his freedom. He vowed to Timo Martin that he would never commit another crime as long as he lived. Martin invited hostility from members of his community while Whitmore resided in his house. His neighbors ordered him to eject the man from the premises immediately. Ultimately, they prevailed, and Timo Martin knew the right thing to do was to protect the children in his community from the unrepentant Peter Whitmore. Some of them felt Martin should be legally barred from working with ex-cons in the future. Dan Brodsky helped Peter Whitmore to find alternative lodgings. He stayed at a hotel in downtown Toronto. As required by the court order, police were notified that he moved and were given the location and name of the hotel. 2 plainclothes officers escorted Whitmore to his new address. They were concerned that if Whitmore was recognized, there would be pandemonium throughout the community. Dan Brodsky served Peter Whitmore up to the media. He said all the right things. He promised not to reoffend. He said he might remain celibate for the rest of his life, not just from children, but from consenting adults. He claimed that he hadn't had sexual thoughts about children for many years, that he would continue to make good on his intentions to keep his distance from minors. He said his decision to speak with the media was motivated by a desire to allay the public's fears and bring them up to speed on what he was doing with his life. He vowed to undergo treatment for his sexual pathology and follow through to the satisfaction of the program's administrators. At one point, Whitmore said, "I know I'm not going to reoffend, because if I do, I'm going to prison for the rest of my life. I don't want to harm anyone else. I've made that promise to myself." He also claimed to have become incapable of being sexually aroused by children. To quote Whitmore, "I've walked the public street and I've seen him, and I feel nothing in regards to a sexual nature." He ended the interview by pointing out that surveillance by the Toronto Police Service would negate any ability he might have to offend against children. Whitmore promised to attend some group meetings for recently released sex offenders who need a network of support amid the hostility they encounter from society at large. Many were skeptical, however. Peter Whitmore was glib, deceptive, and manipulative. He knew that one way to get what he wanted was via quid pro quo. November 12, 2000, Toronto, Ontario. A man approached the counter of a dodgy hotel. He said to the clerk, "2 nights, please." He placed $160 in cash on the surface. A young boy stood next to the customer. First impressions would have placed the boy's age at approximately 16. The boy said nothing. The customer said, "My son isn't feeling very well. We're going to take him to the doctor in the morning." The clerk gave him the keys to room 9. The man and the boy walked down to the room and disappeared inside. Just after 1 a.m., a call came into the Toronto Police Service. The caller said, "Peter Whitmore is inside a room with a young boy." Toronto police rushed over to the inn on Bay. They couldn't afford to waste a second if what they feared was happening was underway. The officer spoke with the front desk clerk. He confirmed that one Peter Whitmore had just checked in with a male teen he claimed was his son. Whitmore even showed the man his identification. The officers pounded on the door of room 9. Whitmore opened it just seconds later. The boy was sitting off to the side. He was still fully clothed. He didn't appear to be distressed. The officer said to Whitmore, "You're under arrest." Whitmore objected, insisting he didn't do anything wrong. The police reminded him of the Section 810 peace bond, which forbade him from having contact with children for the rest of his life. The police also arrested the boy. They wanted to know what transpired between him and Whitmore. He said he was only 13 years old and a runaway from New Brunswick. He met Peter Whitmore the day before. After starting with a friendly conversation, Whitmore offered to take him on a tour of Toronto. An officer said, "Did he touch you in any way?" The boy said, "No, nothing happened." The officers continued to probe, but the boy consistently denied that sexual impropriety had occurred between him and Whitmore. He insisted that they only went to the hotel so he could get off the streets for a couple of days. The police could still charge Whitmore with breaching court orders, and they did. The boy was taken in by child welfare officials before he was sent back to New Brunswick. The public was relieved to hear Peter Whitmore was back in jail, though they also demanded to know how he could have had access to a minor. Police admitted they scaled back the surveillance once Whitmore's treatment programs had begun. March 9, 2001. Peter Whitmore's first court appearance since his arrest. He pleaded guilty to the breach charge. He was slapped with another year-long jail sentence, to be followed by 3 years of probation. Though Whitmore was generally well-behaved in prison, he was still dragging his feet when it came to being treated for his pedophilia. His request to work in the library was denied, because the staff were aware of his history of cutting pictures of children out of catalogs and magazines. November 10th, 2001. Peter Whitmore had served 2/3 of his sentence and was now eligible for early release. Prison officials did not recommend this, as it was abundantly clear that Whitmore needed to do a lot more work on himself if he was ever to prove that he was not a threat to children. Some may not have recognized the double entendre in this statement made by Peter Whitmore to prison officials. Only I am responsible for my life. Only I am responsible for what I do or don't do. To some it would have sounded like he was being accountable and refusing to blame anybody but himself for his actions. On the other hand, one could argue that there was defiance baked into this statement, like he was really saying that the prisons, the courts, and the police could not contain him for long. Unfortunately for the children of Canadian communities, this was not entirely untrue. December 28th, 2001. Toronto, Ontario. Peter Whitmore was back in court just over 6 weeks after his release from prison. The purpose of this session was for police and other justice officials to request authorization from the judge to order that an electronic monitoring device be worn by Whitmore. This was seen as the only effective way to track his movements 24/7. Should approval have been granted, Whitmore would have been the criminal pioneer to wear a tracking bracelet after serving a sentence. Up until then, only inmates on temporary release were required to wear monitoring devices. The Crown stated their case by saying the following: Mr. Whitmore is scheduled to be released from custody on November 10th, 2001, following 8 months of incarceration and treatment. He has not made substantive improvement and continues to present a large risk to public safety, and as a result, we need to know where he is all the time. As always, Whitmore and his attorney argue that these conditions were unacceptable because they infringed on Whitmore's right to privacy. Another problem was that the community would still object to Whitmore's presence in their neighborhoods, monitoring device or not. Judge Shepard did not approve of the bracelet, but he agreed to impose a curfew. Whitmore was required to be off the streets between the hours of 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The curfew would be in place until April 2nd, 2002. Any breaches of these conditions would send Whitmore straight to jail. February 15th, 2002. Once more, Peter Whitmore's disappearing act left police to flail in a haze of smoke and mirrors. When they went to check on him in the motel where he was staying, he was nowhere to be found. A Canada-wide warrant was issued immediately. Police interviewed Whitmore's neighbors in hopes of getting some valuable clues as to his whereabouts. One woman said she didn't know he was Canada's most notorious pedophile. He had wrestled with and tickled her young sons. Fortunately, she was in the room, but it shocked her to think of what else could have happened. Despite the lack of sexual impropriety, it was a breach of his peace bond since he was forbidden to have such close contact with children. February 25th, 2002. Chilliwack, British Columbia. Soon after his arrival in Chilliwack, police discovered his presence and moved quickly. While searching his belongings, they discovered some items that were both disturbing and incriminating. Photos of children, binoculars, latex gloves, lubricant, zip ties, duct tape, an application for a Canadian passport, URLs for child pornography websites. In the eyes of police, these items constituted a rape kit. Whitmore was sent back to Ontario to face justice. Whitmore's latest arrest received nationwide media focus. People were outraged that he was not being sufficiently monitored. They were also critical of the judge who did not approve the use of the ankle monitor. June 18, 2002, Toronto, Ontario. Peter Whitmore pleaded guilty to his charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Justice officials wanted to put him away for 4 years, but that would have meant that the case would go to trial, and those already affected by the traumas of Whitmore's actions would have to be cross-examined, most likely leading to a re-traumatization. Whitmore said nothing and displayed no emotion during the proceedings. Whitmore moved to Chilliwack, British Columbia to stay with his aunt once again. This action elicited the typical kind of blowback from the community. Once, during one of his many incarcerations, Peter Whitmore completed what is called the psychopathy checklist. It is administered as a risk assessment to determine how likely one is to become a violent offender. Among the many criteria that are evaluated are criminal history, lifestyle, attitude, impulse control, the capacity to feel remorse, tendencies toward manipulative behavior, callousness, and charm. The maximum score is 40, or a classic or prototypical psychopath. The average score for a person with no criminal history would be around 5. Peter Whitmore scored 30. Given this result, he presented a very high risk of re-offending. Offenders who score 30 or more have an 80% recidivism rate. July 30th, 2006, Whitewood, Saskatchewan. Kevin White returned from a relaxing weekend at his cottage and checked his voicemail. He received an urgent appeal from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Kevin was not a member of the RCMP. He owned Whitewood Chrysler dealership, but he was also the leader of a civic organization called Citizens on Patrol, and they often assisted the RCMP when a matter was serious enough to require additional staff. White was informed that a 10-year-old boy was missing after going for a ride on his bicycle. Many feared he had been abducted. What the police knew, based on tips given to them by locals, was that a mysterious male stranger was observed driving around town in a van a few days before the boy's disappearance. He came to Whitewood to submit his van for repairs. Police were sure that he only could have taken his van to Kevin White's dealership. They needed any information White could give them about the man. As luck had it, White's memory of the man was still fresh, and what he recalled about their encounter was that there were some oddities. 2 days before, at about 7:45 a.m., White pulled into the parking lot of his dealership. A van was parked in the lot. It bore Alberta plates. It hadn't been there at night when he locked the doors and departed. White didn't think much of it as he entered the dealership. He went into his office. Just as he was about to sit down at his desk, someone knocked loudly on the front door. There were 2 people standing at the door, a man and a boy. White didn't recognize them. The man was Caucasian, in his early 30s, dark brown hair, stubble on his face, about 5 feet 10 inches, and approximately 190 pounds. The boy was tall, svelte, aboriginal, and looked to be in his early teens. White opened the door to see how he could help. The man did all the talking. He said, "We've got some tire trouble." He pointed to the parked van Kevin had seen in the parking lot. The man said, "It's flat." White walked over to the van to take a look. The man continued, "We slept in the van last night." He introduced himself as he extended his hand. Robert Summer. According to Summer, they drove over something incisive the previous evening and pulled into the dealership, whereupon they waited until morning for it to open. Kevin asked them where they were headed. The man said, Moosomin. Moosomin is a small town located about 50 kilometers east of Whitewood. The man said, My wife lives there. The boy stood silently by the man's side. White looked at him. Summers said, My son. White nodded and knelt by the deflated tire to get a closer look. He made friendly small talk, saying, You're from Alberta, eh? Summers said, Yeah, St. Albert. That's where all the big money is. White got up and walked inside the dealership. Summer and his son followed him. White wasn't entirely sure he had the tire Summer was looking for. Summer said, I only had $300 on me, concerned about how much the replacement job would set him back. White was surprised to hear this. Alberta's economy was rich in oil money and jobs. Why would he struggle so much to replace a flat tire? White found a used tire in the back of the storage room that suited the van. White replaced the tire himself while his office manager wrote up the invoice for the repair, which cost $113. Summer went outside to the van to get the money. The boy remained with White. The boy got an eyeful of the interior of the dealership, but said nothing. When Summer returned, he gave White cash. He asked about a vehicle that was up for sale on the lot. He said, I'll give you $300 for it. He said he was thinking of buying it so his son could drive. It seemed to White that the boy was too young to drive. Though this vehicle was used and in rough shape, it was drivable. He insisted on $500. Summers said, All I've got is $300. White hadn't thought about his experience with the man who called himself Summer until he heard the voicemail from the RCMP. He referred them to his office manager, Lynette Loypart. He called her at home and explained the situation. Lynette went to the dealership where she met with the police. She delved into the files until she dug up the invoice she wrote for Robert Summer. The officers were especially interested in getting the license and vehicle identification numbers of the van. They had both been documented. The police got a copy of the invoice and entered the numbers into their computer database. They hit the jackpot. But there was nothing to celebrate. Larry Monroe was convinced his son Adam would come walking through the door any minute. As he said to RCMP officers, he'll try and run. He won't fall prey to that scum. Larry was a man of considerable pride and strength, and he did his utmost to instill those qualities in Adam. He had faith that Adam would find a way to extricate himself from his confinement. Though the Monroes have described themselves as simple farm folks, they are nobody's fools. They were prepared to fight and survive their way out of anything. As Larry thought to himself at the time, God help whoever did this to us. They don't know who they're dealing with. Paula Monroe, Larry's wife and Adam's mother, was not quite so optimistic. Her mind was plagued by the horrific outcomes that could have befallen her son. She couldn't protect her child from whatever had been visited upon him, and that was tearing her apart. She blamed herself for his disappearance, even though there was nothing evidentially that put her at fault. Nothing her husband or the police could say could convince her otherwise. Meanwhile, the police were working overtime to get as many leads as possible. One promising lead came from the Monroes themselves. The man called Summer and the Aboriginal boy visited the Monroes' farm 6 days prior, on July 23rd. They tried to sell the Monroes a DVD player, supposedly so they could buy gas. The Monroes declined the DVD player, but Adam gave the man and the boy a dozen farm-fresh eggs. The man and boy were not there long, and nothing remarkable occurred. The two returned to the Monroe house. Paula was at home with her 3 children. Larry was in town running errands. The man introduced himself to Paula as Robert Summer. He told her the boy was his nephew and his name was Kyle. He gave her a background story, saying that his wife died from cancer 2 years before. He said he was looking for a fresh start after moving out of Alberta. Summer said he was a carpenter and planned to buy an old house in the area, which he would restore. He wanted to introduce his son to Paula's kids so that Kyle would have some companionship with age-appropriate peers. He asked her if he could play with Adam that evening. Paula consented, knowing that Adam always welcomed new faces and was happy to show them around. Though still in grade 4, Adam was an aspiring inventor and was happy to show the funny contraptions he created to Kyle. He told him he dreamed of becoming a scientist one day. He was precocious, creative, and his drive was without limits. His latest inventions were a coffee machine and a toy robot. He also had a way with animals. He nursed an injured crow back to health. The crow was named Russell by the family. Summer was pulling out of the Monroe's driveway when he suddenly stopped. He walked back to the house to inform Paula that he'd caught the flat. Larry arrived about this time. He met Summer and offered to help with the van. This behavior was not out of place. Since the family lived by a major highway, it wasn't unusual for motorists to stop by with requests of all kinds: gas, directions, the use of their telephone, automotive repairs. They were always happy to help. This was a commonality within the prairies. Neighbors helped neighbors, and that accommodation extended to out-of-town visitors. When they moved to Whitewood from Alberta 4 years before that day, the citizens of Whitewood gave them a warm welcome. Adam and his 2 sisters, Sarah, 12, and Brittany, 9, adapted to life in Whitewood as easily as their parents. They were fitting in at school and happy to be there. Now the dream of a happy future in Whitewood was over. They woke up to a nightmare. Larry explained to police how Summer said he had had the tire patched at the local Chrysler dealership the day before, but it was closed. Larry knew who could help. He called local mechanic Willie Cowan, and they all met at his shop. Larry and Robert arrived at the shop at 7 p.m. Cowan and Summer made some small talk as the repairs were underway. Summer told him his son was going to a school located further down the highway, on an indigenous reserve. He said he was enjoying life in Saskatchewan. Larry and Robert returned to the farm within the hour. Kyle and Adam were still playing. Summer told Kyle it was time to go. He said that he might visit the Monroes again another day. The Monroes welcomed their possible return. They didn't stay away for long. Robert and Kyle pulled into the Monroes' driveway Sunday morning. He notified Paula that he saw the sign on their main gate near the highway, which advertised eggs for sale. He said he was interested in buying some. He also suggested that Adam and Kyle could play again that day. He said he had some errands to run, and that it would be a good way to keep Kyle occupied. Paul welcomed the boy, as she knew Adam would enjoy his company. Larry was working on the road in his truck, and she had farm chores to do, so the arrangement worked for her. Adam's plans for the day were to show Kyle a house that was alleged to be haunted. Robert Summer offered to drive the boys to the house, but Adam insisted on riding his bike there. He let Kyle use an older bike the kids owned. The boys departed just after 11 a.m. Paula told Adam to return by lunch. He promised they wouldn't go far and that it wouldn't take long. Noon came and went. No sign of Adam and Kyle. Paula became concerned. She called her husband and explained what was happening. She told him she would take the girls and take a walk through the area. She assumed that the boys were probably occupied playing in a field somewhere and lost track of time. For a while, Paula became angry at Adam. As the sun went down, anxiety and fear arose inside of her. She asked neighbors if they had seen the boys, but they hadn't. After a lengthy search, her heart sank when she arrived at the haunted house. She saw the 2 bicycles, but the boys were nowhere in sight. As soon as she got to a phone, she called Larry. She told him something was very much out of place, and she suspected she knew what was wrong. She was hysterical, screaming into the phone, "Rob Summer and Kyle have him. They took him." Paula called the police and reported her son missing. When the police questioned Paula and Larry in their house, they produced a photograph of a man. They asked them if they had seen him. They did. He was Robert Summer. Paula said, "Who is he? What has he done?" The photo was a mugshot. The officers were reluctant to go into details regarding the man's criminal history. They just told her they would do everything possible to locate her son. The Monroes had questions about Kyle. They wondered if he had been an accomplice to Summer. The police had nothing to report. Kyle Mason had a history of erratic behavior that involved heated arguments with his family. He ran away frequently. He stayed at many different locations. He had put his family through a great deal of turmoil. Still, he usually returned home. Friday, July 21st. A man named Al Baxter brought home a stranger. He was approached by him as he worked on a roadside construction project on the western outskirts of Winnipeg, Manitoba. He introduced himself as Robert Summer. He asked Baxter to help him get hired by his employer. Ken Melnick, general manager of Conpro Industries, hired Summer. Summer told the on-site supervisor he was desperate for money. As Summer and Baxter worked alongside each other, they got a little more familiar. Summer told him he was from Newfoundland, worked for the Coast Guard, and had been working in Calgary on a 4-month leave. He said he was eager to reunite with his estranged wife and his 2 children. Baxter told him his wife was from Atlantic Canada. Baxter divulged troubles from his own life, like his stepson Kyle, who was a handful due to his tendency to run away from home. Summer told Baxter he was on the lookout for temporary lodgings. He was living in his van. He asked Baxter for suggestions. Baxter said he might be able to stay with him, but he would need his wife's approval first. Baxter invited Summer back to his home at the end of the workday. His wife, Jennifer Mason, and her 4 children were home. They were introduced to Robert Summer. Baxter suggested to Jennifer that they could offer their assistance to Summer. Baxter said to her, "I feel so sorry for him." Summer was at the house, sitting in the basement. Jennifer said, "I'm not sure that's what I want to do." She was a little uneasy about this proposal, especially since the man was an outsider and there were already tensions in their house. Summer eavesdropped on their conversation and informed Jennifer that he didn't wish to be a burden. He suggested that they go out to eat on his nickel and they could discuss it then. They went out to a local Chinese restaurant. Jennifer agreed to let Robert stay, provided he was never alone in the house with the children. She said that a caregiver came to the house several times a week, and that Summer would have to leave the house whenever she or Al weren't home. Kyle was present and interrupted their dialogue, saying to Al, "Hey Dad, I know you just got paid today. Give me $20. Baxter said no. Summer said in jest, "Oh, come on, give it to him." Baxter didn't find it so amusing. He said, "No, we don't give him money anymore. He just uses it to buy pot." Insisted he understood. He said, "I worked in social services for 4 years. I've dealt a lot with getting kids off drugs." Baxter and Mason were eager for more info. Kyle was difficult to deal with, and they welcomed any kind of outside assistance if it meant his recalcitrant behavior could be curtailed. Suddenly Robert Summer became reluctant to install himself in their household. given the proposed living arrangements. He said, "You guys have a lot going on in your lives, a lot of chaos. I'm not really sure I should stay." Jennifer insisted upon it. She had warmed to the man. His background and utility had edged his appeal as a lodger a few more notches on the incline. Summer wanted to show them some gratitude. As they left the restaurant, he said, "I'll show you I'm a good guy. Let's go buy some groceries." Al and Jennifer told him it wasn't necessary. Robert said, "You know us Easterners, we're giving like that." He accompanied them to a Safeway supermarket, where he purchased $150 in groceries. He assured them there would be more where that came from. He promised he would pay rent and help out in any other way he could. Summer made an offer that caught Jennifer off guard. He wanted to take Kyle on a camping trip. To take the edge off, he said, just for a couple weeks, to get him away from some of the bad influences. Jennifer was put off by this proposal. It was instantly rejected. After returning home, Jennifer put the groceries away in the kitchen and did some housework. Al and Robert were outside. When they re-entered the house, Summer told Jennifer they came up with a way to alter his plan that was more to her liking. He said, "Me and Al are going to take a trip." Jennifer said, "What?" Summer told her he arranged to buy a truck in Regina and needed to commute to the site to pick it up. He said the only snag was to come up with something to do with the van he was currently driving. He came up with an idea. He said to her, "I'll give you guys the van. Al's been a good buddy to me." There was one catch. Al would have to accompany Robert to Saskatchewan. Once there, Robert could get his new truck, and he could give the van to Al. Baxter was pleased with this deal. A new van, even if used, would be a big help to the family. Robert integrated Kyle into this arrangement. He said it would be fun if Kyle could come along for the trip. He said it might do him some good to get away from the big city for a few days. Kyle overheard the entire conversation. Summer's idea appealed to him greatly. He said to his mother, "Mom, can I go? Can I go?" Jennifer agreed that it might be good for her son to have a change of scenery. Still, she wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea. It became more attractive once it was established that Al would be there. After some trepidation, she agreed. Robert suggested an immediate departure. He said they would reach Regina by morning and return the next evening. They left at 9:30 p.m. The men hadn't even left the city limits before Summer proposed that they stop somewhere to clean the interior of the van. He told Al he didn't want to give him a van that was dirty and dusty. They pulled over in the district of Headingley. They stopped at the construction site where Al and Robert met. After they cleaned the van, Al called Jennifer at 11 p.m. and told her they stopped but were about to embark on their journey in earnest. He promised to call in the morning. Brandon, Manitoba. Al Baxter woke from sleep. It was just after 1 a.m. They were parked at a bus terminal. Summer was behind the wheel. Kyle was sitting in the back seat. Robert looked concerned. He said, "There's a problem with the van." He went on to explain that the van was stalling and that they probably wouldn't make it as far as Regina. It got worse. He said, "When we cleaned the van out last night, we threw out a bag. It had $2,000 in it." Baxter didn't recall seeing the bag. Summer said it likely got mixed up with the garbage. Summer proposed a solution. Baxter could take a Greyhound bus and go back to the construction site to retrieve the money. He said it would hopefully still be in the garbage. Robert said he would remain in Brandon and would get the van fixed there. They didn't have an appointment, so it would likely take all day to get it fixed. Robert also suggested that Kyle should stay with him. He said they got to talking while Al was asleep, and Kyle told Robert he very much wanted to go on the camping trip. Robert told Al he would pay for his bus ticket plus a one-way plane ticket from Winnipeg to Brandon so that Al's return trip would not take too long. He would likely return by the end of the day, whereupon the men would camp for the night and then move onward to Regina in the morning. Though Al was a little apprehensive about this plan, he was very keen to get a new van. He also liked the impact the promise of the camping trip made on Kyle's behavior. Robert bought Al the bus ticket and sent him on his way just before 7 a.m. Al told Kyle he would see him before long. Winnipeg. Jennifer Mason was furious. She couldn't believe Al would leave Kyle alone with a man who was little more than a stranger to them, and to think that he left them all the way out in Brandon. When Al searched the construction site, he tore every bag of garbage apart, but did not find the money. He spoke to Jennifer's mother that morning. She was enraged, saying to him, "You brought a strange man into your house and let him around the girls?" And how convenient the van broke down. Jennifer now worried that Robert Summer had deliberately duped her family. She was reluctant to call the police after Kyle's history of delinquency and running away. When Al returned home that afternoon, she shouted at him, saying, "How could you leave my son with a stranger?" Jennifer did some digging on her own. None of the auto body repair businesses in Brandon reported seeing a man and boy consistent with her description of Robert Summer and Kyle. She called the Coast Guard to get information about Robert. Their records did not reflect that such a man had ever been enlisted by the organization. Early Sunday morning. The phone rang. Jennifer answered. Robert Summer asked, "Is Al there?" She shouted, "Where the fuck are you?" Summer said, "Calm down." Jennifer said, "Where's Kyle?" Summer said, "He's right here." He promised her that everything was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. He said they experienced difficulty in finding someone who could fix the van at a low price. They were looking for a so-called backyard mechanic. He told her Kyle was enjoying himself camping the previous evening. Jennifer demanded to know exactly where they were. Summer's answer was vague. He only told her they were just outside of Brandon. Jennifer told him to put Kyle on the phone. When Kyle took the phone, his mother said, "Where are you?" Kyle, "I don't know." Jennifer, "Kyle, look around. Can you see anything? Any streets? Any signs?" Kyle, "I don't see anything." Summer got back on the line. He said, "Quit freaking out. I'm going to bring him back tonight." This did not suffice with Jennifer. She said, "I never told you you could take him. You don't have my permission." Summer reiterated that everything would be fine. With that, he hung up the phone abruptly. No goodbye. Jennifer Mason now knew that this was not just a matter of Kyle being rebellious and running away. He was in trouble, and she called the police. She brought a pillow and blanket out to her front step that night, so that when Kyle returned, she would be able to greet him without a second to waste. That moment never came. The next day, Jennifer and other relatives drove to Brandon to find Kyle. She didn't believe the police took the report seriously enough to put in the effort to track him down. Indeed, when she called in the report, an officer said, "They're probably just on an adventure. Maybe he's having the time of his life." As Jennifer traveled throughout western Manitoba, she stopped at all campgrounds, gas stations, and mechanics. She carried a photo of Peter Whitmore. She would say to every person she met, "This man's got my son." Several days passed with no word of Kyle's whereabouts. July 31st, 2006. Larry and Paula Monroe were still worried sick about Adam. One significant piece of information was that the boy Robert Summer called his son was a 14-year-old Winnipeg boy named Kyle Mason. Mason was also a victim of Robert Summer. The Monroes were told that Summer tricked Kyle's family into leaving him in his custody a week before. The police told the Monroes that the name Robert Summer was a pseudonym. His real name was Peter Whitmore. The next morning they watched the morning program Canada AM when the man who abducted their son appeared on their television screen. What they learned from an interview that had been conducted 6 years earlier was that Whitmore was turfed out of a West End Toronto borough called Etobicoke when the locals discovered he was a serial sex offender who targeted children. He was 29 years old at the time. His identity and record were exposed by several of the district's 1,500 residents. They became aware that he was about to move into their community, and they filled a 700-seat auditorium to protest against it. At some point, a few of them discovered the address where he was due to begin his new life after leaving prison. Fearing for his life, he fled from the area. Some citizens demanded that he wear a tracking device. Others wanted him under police surveillance 24/7. Some just wanted him killed. To address these concerns and placate the mob, Peter Whitmore reported to the studios of CTV in the company of his lawyer, Dan Brodsky, on Friday, October 20th, 2000. The interview was conducted by the show's host, Valerie Pringle. Pringle, a convicted child molester, was forced to flee his Toronto home after local residents discovered where he was living, although they knew he was in the neighborhood. Peter Whitmore is a repeat offender. He was released from prison last week after serving 5 years for kidnapping and raping an 8-year-old girl. With us now, Peter Whitmore, also his lawyer, Daniel Brodsky. Good morning. Where do you go now? Whitmore. I'm not sure. Pringle. Who decides that? Whitmore. I'm not sure who is going to decide where I go. Probably Pringle. Do you decide, or is it done in collaboration with the police? Whitmore. It will be done in collaboration with the police and my lawyer. Brodsky. What we've got some short-term placement. We're working on a long-term plan. But for the time being, we've got him a place to be that's safe, we think, for a little while, but we need to put a long-term plan in place. And all we're doing is working on it right now. Given what's happened, it is really hard for that to take place. Pringle. Given what's happened, do you think there will be any community that will accept you living there? Whitmore. I'm hoping there will be, but it's hard to say right now if anyone is going to accept where I go. Pringle. Do you understand that any community would want you? Whitmore. I'm not sure if any community would want me. Pringle. I think people are really troubled by the fact that you refused treatment in prison. Why did you do that? Whitmore. I never actually refused treatment in prison. Pringle. What did you do? Whitmore. We had a program called Regional Pacific Center in Kingston. The director was pulled out for charges outside, so the program was shut down for 3 years. Pringle. So are you saying nothing was offered to you? Whitmore. No, because when I did have something offered, the doctor, LaFontaine, was charged with assaulting 4 different inmates, and so I am unable to take the programs and complete them because of different things. Pringle. Because I believe the understanding is that you have refused treatment and are not currently undergoing treatment for your problem. And do you see it as a problem? Do you think you're sick? Whitmore. Yes, I see a problem, and I'm currently looking for treatment. Available options. Brodsky. The difficulty my client faces is that there is no pill, There's no surgery. There's no drug that you can take that is going to help with the problem. So what we're doing is looking at different options. Mr. Whitmore is keeping an open mind about it. He is committed to treatment, but what we want to know is what's out there for him, because there is no magic. Are you concerned that you will reoffend? Whitmore: no. Pringle: do you have any control over your impulses? Whitmore: I have control over what I do, and I'm not concerned I'm going to reoffend. I am looking for treatment at the time, though, to help alleviate any problems that may arise. Pringle: you have been described as unrepentant, and you were described that way after the rape and confinement of an 8-year-old girl, which is what you went to prison for. Whitmore: that's right. I feel bad for what happened. I can't change the past, but I can change the future and not do it again. Pringle: do you think that's possible? Whitmore: yes. Pringle: you have also been described as cunning and manipulative in terms of gaining access to kids. Brodsky: that's a description, but the fact of the matter is, what you got right now is a fellow who, if he were to offend violently again, the Attorney General would most certainly consent to the institution of dangerous offender proceedings. And no matter what he has before him, the potential of a lifetime of imprisonment, and with that strong disincentive and a commitment to seeking treatment, you really do have the potential. It's very difficult to treat pedophilia, but there have been some remarkable successes. He's motivated to take treatment, and he knows that if he were to fail and offend violently again, he could spend the rest of his life in jail. Pringle: how do you feel about going back to jail? Whitmore: I'm not interested in going back to any sort of prison. Pringle: what do you want to do with your life? Can you work? Do you have family support? Whitmore: I'm unemployable right now. I missed the last question. Pringle: do you have family support? Do you have people? Whitmore: I have one family member for support, and that's it right now. Brodsky: not even somebody who lives in the province he's living in. Like, he had some support, but as a result of all the events that took place yesterday, that's now evaporated. And so he has virtually nothing. He really is looking for a community or a person or someone who can offer a suggestion. The difficulty for him is there is nothing out there. No matter where he goes, the community is going to be uncomfortable. He's got certain conditions. Pringle: and understandably. Whitmore: but if people want me to, I want to take treatment. And it's going to be very hard to take treatment if I'm moving from town to town because of media or people not wanting me. Pringle: do you think the public should be notified when you move or notified of your whereabouts? Whitmore: my whereabouts, but not my exact address. I mean, I'm trying to reintegrate back into the community and trying to change my life by taking treatment and other programs, and I find it hard to do when I'm chased out of different communities. Brodsky: we have taken the position that targeted institutions should know. The people who run schools, playgrounds, etc., where my client is not allowed to be, and not allowed to be for the rest of his life, should be notified, but, Pringle: and that would help you? Whitmore: that would help me, and it would help the community as well. Pringle: but if everybody knows where you live, then you're a hunted man. Whitmore: that's right. I'd be a marked target. Pringle: can people trust you? Whitmore: I believe so, but I have to have some sort of new record to prove that. Brodsky: he needs a place to live, because in order to put money in the bank, you have to have a place to live, and you have to be able to put it there. He needs to get a track record. He needs a place to go where he can sit, where he can get a job. He doesn't want to be receiving social assistance. He wants to be able to go get a job and try to reintegrate into society and become a productive member. but he needs to be given a chance to do that. And so far, he's not been able to find anybody who will give him a chance. Whitmore. The community can trust me. I have 24-hour police surveillance on me, and has been since I've been released from prison, and probably will be for quite some time. Brodsky. Both for his protection and the community's. Pringle. What happens if you go near kids? Whitmore. In what regard? Pringle. Well, in terms of being able to control yourself. Whitmore. I have no problems walking past anybody. Pringle. Do you have anything to say to the kids who you've victimized already? Whitmore. I've attempted treatment. I am taking treatment. And I can apologize, but that's really not going to help anybody. By saying I apologize, I have to show that I'm actually doing something to change it so that no one else gets hurt in the process, or any future people. Pringle. So why did you agree to come on television? Whitmore. Just to let people know that I feel that with all the media presence and everybody else, that I could be a target unless everyone knows what I'm going to do. And that's why I'm here, just to let people know what I'm going to do, or attempt to do. July 31st, 2006, Broadview, Saskatchewan. Kyle Mason and Adam Monroe were still missing, and not one law enforcement officer in the province could rest on their laurels. This was the case that took precedence above all others. The public kept the phone ringing off the hook. It had to be dealt with and solved without delay, regardless of the outcome. Peter Whitmore's van was found near Kipling, Saskatchewan, parked in the driveway of a farmhouse. The police recognized a need to handle the situation with kid gloves. They even brought in crisis negotiators. They didn't know if Peter Whitmore would emerge from a door with a boy plastered against him, facing outwards with a gun to his head or a knife against his neck. Constable Tim Schwartz walked determinedly but tentatively toward the house. To his surprise, the visage of a small blonde-haired boy appeared in the distance. The boy ran in his direction. It was Adam Monroe making a mad dash for freedom. He ran straight into Schwartz's arms. Schwartz brought the boy to his cruiser. The boy looked well, aside from the infusion of terror that held him within its grip. There were no signs of physical abuse. The officers told Adam that he was safe and protected. They notified him that his parents were worried and would be over the moon once they saw him. They gave him some water and assured him that the nightmare was over. A crack appeared on Adam's face, with enough pliability to form a smile. While they didn't want to compound the stress Adam had been going through, there was much information that the authorities needed. Kyle Mason was still missing, and Peter Whitmore was due to face the music. Adam was stable enough to explain what happened. When Whitmore saw the police cars pull up, he knew his luck had run out. He ordered the boys to grab some survival provisions from the house, like candles, flashlights, and food, and flee to the small barn in the back of the yard. Kyle and Whitmore were still in the barn. The police asked Adam why the others were still in the barn, but didn't stop Adam from leaving. Adam said, "He told me to go." When asked if Whitmore had weapons, he said he had a gun. He also mentioned that Whitmore pointed the gun at both him and Kyle. To quote Adam, he said it can shoot through body armor. The police began to communicate with Whitmore. A walkie-talkie was delivered to him. At one point, he said to them, "Maybe I should just come out shooting." When asked why he allowed Adam Monroe to leave, he said, "He was too young. He was suffering." Police told him he did the right thing and that he needed to do the same with Kyle Mason. Whitmore said he couldn't. He said he knew he messed up and would be going to jail for a very long time. He said he had run out of chances and that this would be the crime that would put him away for good. The police tried to downplay the consequences and focus on releasing the boy. He said he was worried the police would shoot him once they could get him alone. At one point he said, "I don't want to be a dangerous offender." Meanwhile, Peter Whitmore was using terror and manipulation to control Kyle Mason's actions. Using the soft sell, he would say things like, "You're my only friend, the only one who understands me." When that didn't work, he threatened to return to Winnipeg so he could murder his mother and sisters. At one point, he lied and said, "Your mom and stepdad gave me $6,000 to take you. They didn't want you. They said you were nothing but trouble." Taking the tack of using a guilt trip, he said, "If you leave me, I'll kill myself." At one point, Whitmore begged Kyle to kill him. He said, "I want you to kill me." Proving he was not nearly as bereft of morals as Whitmore, Kyle refused to comply with this directive. Realizing he would have to do the job himself, Whitmore decided to concoct some poison with whatever materials he found in his immediate environment: a pack of tobacco and a can of WD-40. He mixed them in a glass of water. He swallowed the water. Nothing came of it. Suddenly the walkie-talkie crackled to life once again. It was the police. They were willing to make a deal. Whitmore agreed to relinquish custody of Kyle Mason, provided that he would not be slapped with a dangerous offender designation. This was not guaranteed as a verbal contract. It was filed with the appropriate legal authorities. He was satisfied once he knew that though he was sure to be put behind bars once again, he would be released someday. Kyle walked out of the barn tentatively just after 11 p.m. Heavily armed officers whisked him away to a cruiser. When Whitmore emerged, he had his hands in the air. He was ordered to the ground, where he was weighed down and swarmed. August 2nd, 2006. Winnipeg, Manitoba. Though Kyle was happy and relieved that he was about to be reunited with his family, not everything he said to his mother when they had their first phone call before he came home was pleasant. He said, "Why did you leave me with this guy?" Having dealt with this issue, they were looking forward to seeing each other again. Adam Monroe's family were ecstatic to have him back in Broadview, Saskatchewan. Larry Monroe thanked law enforcement by saying, "We cannot express our deep gratitude for helping Adam to find his way home. The system really worked." Police searched the barn where Peter Whitmore kept the boys captive. They found some incriminating items: the gun, which turned out to be a pellet gun; a knife, used to brandish threateningly at the boys; several packages of lubricant; a long chain attached to a bed; a sample of pubic hairs that were found to have originated from the body of Kyle Mason; a trove of computer disks containing 49 pictures of children, primarily boys, in swimsuits; 31 videos showing boys engaging in sex acts with adults, none of which featured Whitmore. August 3rd, 2006, Regina, Saskatchewan. Peter Whitmore appeared in court for a hearing to learn of his new charges, which were: forcible confinement of Kyle Mason between July 23rd and August 1st; numerous sexual assaults causing bodily harm against Kyle Mason between July 23rd and August 1st; an additional count of sexual assault causing bodily harm against Kyle Mason between July 23rd to August 1st; abduction of Adam Monroe on July 30th; forcible confinement of Adam Monroe on July 30th; numerous sexual assaults causing bodily harm of Adam Monroe between July 30th and August 1st; uttering threats to kill Kyle Mason between July 23rd and August 1st; uttering threats to kill Adam Monroe between July 30th and August 1st; assaulting Adam Monroe between July 30th and August 1st, possessing a weapon, to wit, a pellet gun, between July 30th and August 1st, possessing a weapon, to wit, a knife, between July 30th and August 1st, possessing child pornography between July 23rd and August 1st, making child pornography available to Kyle Mason between July 23rd and August 1st, making child pornography available to Adam Monroe between July 30th and August 1st. August 10th, 2006, Regina, Saskatchewan. Crown Attorney Anthony Guerin announced that no kind of deal would be made with Peter Whitmore and his lawyer. The notion that Peter Whitmore was just a sick man who needed treatment for his illness didn't hold up, the reason being that he had been given unlimited opportunities to seek and apply treatment. In every case, his cooperation was momentary, when not withdrawn completely. He had demonstrated that he was an unrepentant abuser of children. He could not be entrusted with the same freedoms the average citizen has to walk the streets without supervision. Under those circumstances, he could only be relied upon to target the community's vulnerable sector. He is exactly the sort of figure from whom that sector needs to be protected. Guerin declared that the dangerous offender status designation would be sought. It was the only legal recourse to ensure the nation's children would be safe from Whitmore. When asked about the documents the RCMP filed, he said that the Mounties filed a recommendation which does not carry the same weight in a court of law as when the Crown makes a similar proposal. September 8th, 2006, Regina, Saskatchewan. Peter Whitmore decided to represent himself in court. Such a move is always ill-advised, as the judge pointed out, but Whitmore didn't exactly have a history of sound judgment. January 12th, 2007, Regina, Saskatchewan. Anthony Guerin got authorization for a direct indictment. Whitmore's attempt to direct the course of the proceedings failed spectacularly, and was a lesson in why one shouldn't represent themselves without a legal background. Whitmore was outraged, saying, "How can I appeal the decision?" Judge Carol Snell said, "You can't." Whitmore said, "I'm not allowed to look at my disclosure. I'm not allowed to have a bail hearing. I'm not allowed to have a preliminary hearing. I have no rights in Saskatchewan." Regina Correction Center. Peter Whitmore began to crack up. He began cutting himself, making several slashes to his stomach. He defecated on the floor of his cell and rubbed the feces into his wound. He was taken to the facility's medical clinic for treatment and placed on suicide watch for a few days. Once he was returned to general population, he went back to work on himself, hell-bent on self-destruction. He stabbed his scrotum with a ballpoint pen. He broke it off, leaving several small pieces of it embedded inside. He was taken to hospital for surgery and was put on suicide watch for several days while recuperating. July 18th, Whitewood, Saskatchewan. Provincial justice officials announced that a mutual agreement was made with Peter Whitmore, and the public was angered by the conditions. The deal required that Whitmore plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a life sentence that would allow him to apply for parole in 7 years. July 23rd, 2007. Regina, Saskatchewan. Peter Whitmore pled guilty to all the charges. Anthony Guerin commented on the legacy of pain that will remain in the lives of Adam Monroe and Kyle Mason. What we heard today is a tragedy. For these boys to end up as sex slaves, one can't imagine anything more grave. He was and is beyond control. He killed so much of who they were and where they lived. Details of what went on in the barn came to light. Some highlights. Whitmore forced both boys to walk around him naked and call him master. Whitmore forced Kyle to shave his pubic hair to appear younger. Whitmore dictated Kyle's every move over a walkie-talkie as he directed him on where to take Adam Monroe before he absconded with both of the boys. Whitmore kept Adam chained to a bed on numerous occasions while raping him. Whitmore raped Kyle repeatedly. Whitmore threatened to kidnap Adam's younger sister. He threatened other young relatives and his parents. He made similar threats to Kyle. Whitmore put Adam on a dog leash and fed him dog food when he wasn't feeding him crackers and water. Whitmore would brandish an X-Acto knife and threaten to cut Adam's skin off if he didn't comply with his sexual agenda. Whitmore told the boys he was a former member of the Canadian Armed Forces and an ex-Navy SEAL, claiming to have access to high-powered weaponry and access to an aircraft carrier. He told them he tortured many other similar victims and killed 13 other children whose corpses he buried. He always kept the pellet gun on his person, but told the boys his was a .22 caliber handgun with hollow point bullets capable of shooting through body armor. He told them about a so-called night mission, which would consist of killing an entire family in the Kipling area and stealing their vehicle. He once nearly let Adam escape, but cornered him by pointing his gun at his head and didn't allow him to leave. He showed them stills and video of child pornography on a portable DVD player. They were instructed to do what they saw the children in the videos were doing. He could do plenty of damage, but he wasn't so adept at damage control. Whitmore allowed himself to be represented by a public defender this time around. After they described the abuse he suffered as a child, he made his own statements. When asked if he had anything to say, Whitmore simply said, "I'm sorry. I had no right to take either of the children from the love and safety of their families. I'm ashamed of what I've done to the children, their families, the community. There are none more vulnerable, none more valuable than children." Queen's Bench Justice Ian McClellan described Whitmore's actions as repulsive and sickening. He only saw value in the deal that was being made because it would spare the victims from being cross-examined in court. These remarks were not quite as poignant as the victim impact statements made by the boys' mothers. Paula Monroe's statement: "There are issues at school with the kids picking on our children because of what happened. There is one particular bully who calls Adam faggot to his face all the time. We are withdrawing our children from school this coming year and will be homeschooling. Our family needs more time to heal without all the negative impact from school. We had taken Adam off Ritalin in the spring before the abduction. We had to put him back on it at school so that he could settle down in school. We had to put him on sleeping pills for a while at night because he was afraid to go to sleep at night. Adam would struggle to get out of bed in the morning because sleep was a safe place. He had nightmares for quite a while and still wakes several times each night. We had to take his bed out of his room because he was afraid to sleep on a bed and it brought back too many memories. We had to put a futon couch in his bedroom so that he was able to get some rest. Adam doesn't like to ride his bike anymore and has only left the yard once on his bike in the last year. He is easily scared when he encounters confrontations of any kind, i.e., fighting with his sisters or violence on TV. Adam was tested for AIDS and other communicable diseases. This was very stressful for us, knowing that our little boy may have been infected with a disease like AIDS. The waiting was unbearable, and we waited for test results from Peter Whitmore and Kyle Mason. We have been a family in crisis so much since this happened, and we need to just put it to rest. We don't understand the criminal justice system and have been very frustrated with the delays. Neither Larry nor I have heard the whole story yet of Adam's abduction. He has just finished it with his counselor, but I do not know the details. I don't want to know, but I have to know. I feel that we need to get past the trial stage so that we can deal with it one more time and then put it to rest. We need to heal and carry on with our lives. I don't know what long-term effects this will have on my son. Hopefully, with continued counseling, he will have a bright future, grow up to be a loving husband and father. I pray this makes him a stronger person. Jennifer Mason's statement. Not knowing if I would ever see my son again, or if I did, would he still be alive, was unbearable. Eating and sleeping did not exist during the days my son was missing. All I did was cry, pace the floor, and always have the phone close to me. My son has been terrified to sleep by himself for months after the incident, and still continues to sleep in the living room. I went over and sat and watched my son sleep to help him feel secure, and sometimes I would hear him whispering and stirring. I have experienced nightmares that have kept me awake at night in the last year. I have also experienced depression and panic attacks. My son has had emotional breakdowns where he would cry and say things like, "I'm worthless. My life sucks." All I could do was hold him and tell him he was not worthless. Since this has happened, there is not a night that goes by that I don't check on him at least twice through the night. My son will never be the same. Maybe he will learn to cope and find a place to carry it within him through his therapy. But he will carry the memories every single day of his life. My son did not deserve for these horrible things to happen to him. But as horrible as it is, all we can do is stick together as a family and pray that he will come through this and be able to live a normal life. 2013 was the first year Peter Whitmore was eligible for parole. He remains in prison and will likely die there, since he received a life sentence. Do you think Peter Whitmore might feel more remorseful these days? The record would suggest otherwise. This autobiography he wrote gives his account of his criminal history as it pertains to his sexual abuse of children. You can glean from his perspective if he truly feels remorse for what he has done. I was going to say some things, but I thought better about it and decided that I would take the responsibility to describe my first 10 years to the best of my ability. However, I will be leaving out names, countries, and towns that would lead to a criminal investigation against certain family members. Also, during my later years, I will also leave out the names, places, and countries of any and all things that could lead to criminal charges. There are 2 incidents that are known to police, but no details about the actual crime, as this information is not known to police. As I do not know the names of all my victims, I will call them the following: boy, child, and victim. This will also help me not to give out any names that belong to any undisclosed victims. I will also not give my company names, locations, or countries that they are in. But I will give the types of companies there are. I would ask the psychologists not to mention the whereabouts or the names of my companies, as I do not believe that their disclosure would benefit either myself as the group. Also, I do not want anyone to use the information for wrong I did either criminally or morally. I will also not discuss any financial assets, either liquid or property. Now, I want to clear up something now. Not one of us has lied to officials or friends to hide their criminal activities or their past. I used to do it all the time, so I was called a compulsive liar. I really did not care about this label as long as my past stayed there, but over the past several years, I have devised a plan where I could talk about my past as long as I disclosed no names, crimes, or countries, so that this is what I've been doing since. Now I'll begin. The first 10 years of my life have been told to me through family members, some of them who went through the same as me. Also, I have obtained several hospital reports, police reports, and school records from foreign countries. Interpol is a great source of information for someone. I am changing the beginning of my autobiography after a phone call with a family member who corrected me on some of my details. I was taken from my parents at 2 weeks old. The actual reasons why are still unclear. All I know is that I had some sort of brain injury. My brother and sister were removed as well. 3 of my family actually took us from the home. We were placed in separate homes, I with a family member, my brothers and sister with another family. For approximately 1 year, I stayed with this family member. Then I was moved in with my brothers and sister. It was here that we were shipped to different places and countries for sex. At about 2 to 3 years old, while being back in the country, I was hospitalized. It was here that the first reports of sexual abuse were noticed. I had anal scarring. We were removed from the home and placed on a farm. The problem was that these were friends with the other home, so we continued being sent abroad on weekends and holidays. There were times that I even missed school for some time. It was these families that sold me and my brothers and sisters into the sex trade. But I was the money maker as I was blonde, blue eyes, and extremely young. In 2 countries, the police sent me back to Canada when I was caught. I was part of an international child porn ring. So were my brothers and sisters. To this day, there are thousands of children in the same circumstances. As for feelings about this part of my life, I really do not have any. For 2 reasons. Number 1, I do not know if I am being told the entire truth about my childhood. Number 2, I do not know what exactly happened to me. I can only imagine what happened, plus official reports. But all these reports and thinking what may have happened does not bring any sort of feelings out. You cannot feel what you do not remember. At around 9 years old, I stayed with a good family for about 1 year. However, during this time, I was destructive, troublesome, and sexually interested in the female body of their daughter, who was the same age as I was. We were caught exploring each other's body, and I was beaten, hospitalized, and then moved to my real parents. There I met my brothers and sisters again. I was 10 years old. I was there only 2 weeks when my oldest brother raped me both orally and anally. No charges, as I was not believed by my parents. He was the good boy of the family and could do no wrong. However, this was the only time he did this, but I remember every detail even to this day. I beat him up several times over the years, but when I shot his car up while he was in it, I missed, but he left the country and has not been seen since. I tried to kill him. For the first several months, I was at my parents'. My other brother tried to kill me several times. Finally, a teacher noticed a severe rope burn around my neck, and he brought me to the hospital where charges were laid, but later I withdrew them. However, because of this incident, I was put in a psych ward. During my time there, I was examined by several psychologists and psychiatrists. I was diagnosed with acute, emotionally disturbed, socially maladjusted childhood psychosis, anxiety disorder. Also, during my stay there, we tried to have family counseling, but after 2 sessions, we never had any more. I was released shortly thereafter. I was placed back into my parents' home till I was 12. During this time, I was physically abused to the point that I hid from everyone and would sneak out for food after midnight when I knew everyone was asleep. I stayed away from home for as long as I could. I began stealing from stores and my school, but I never got caught. I then stole some vehicles from the Ministry of Transportation. I got caught, but the police returned me home. I got a really vicious beating that night. The next day, my parents felt so bad that they did anything I wanted for the next several days. It was great. I was also used as a pawn between my parents. They would fight over me. Literally, at times, each would grab an arm and try to pull me apart. Then one night, one of my brothers found out that my dad was having sex with my sister. He pulled a gun and was going to kill him. The gun was taken away from him, but given to me. I hid the gun in my room. I played with it for a while, decided on whether or not to kill everyone. I decided against it at the time, but now I think I should have. I was an angry child, confused, and constantly worried about my safety and the safety of others. I was also scared that I was going to get beat again. The days that I did not get beat were the worst, as I would at least know after a beating that I was safe till the next day. But on the days I wasn't, the anticipation and worry were real tortures. I used to act out on these days, just to get a beating and get it over with. At 12, I was moved by my relatives to another town and placed in CAS. I went to an intake farm where I was raped on a daily basis by the man and the 4 older boys. I stayed there approximately 2 months. I finally told my relatives and was removed from CAS care. My relative then paid for a private firm to look after me, but before I was allowed to move into a group home, I needed to be assessed first. I was placed in a special home, sort of like a jail. It was here that I had my first consensual oral sex with a boy that was a year younger than me. This only happened once. I did not do well there. I was again very antisocial, and I did not get along with anyone. I continually fought authority and went into my dream life all the time. The same thing I do now. I read books and became the character, or watched movies and became that person, which is why I watch a lot of family movies. I was also checked out and assessed at a psych ward for 30 days, again, similar diagnosis. I was approved for a special group home for abused kids with emotional difficulties. At this time, I was also regressing to a boy of 9 or 10 years old, and still do this to this day. It is a security feature for me while in this state. I don't care what you do to me. During my time in this group home, I had 2 sexual encounters with 2 boys. One boy lasted 2 weeks till he told. I was 13 and he was 10. The other boy, for one night in a tent, was oral sex only. The police were involved with the one boy, but it was decided that no charges be laid. I was, however, removed to a room of my own. There was no counseling offered to me at this time. Then, when I was 15, I lost control and became very violent towards the staff. I do not remember what set me off, nor do I remember what I did, but when I came back to myself, there was a lot of people sitting on me. I was told after that one of the staff touched me sexually, and I became a different person. The staff was removed. I ran away after that, because I was afraid of what I was capable of doing. I was caught, returned, and then underwent a court battle to go live with my parents. As soon as I moved back with them, nothing had changed, so I ran away. During my travel, I realized that people gave me money if they could suck my dick. Truckers especially. I finally ended up in Hollywood, California, where I became a prostitute. I met my wife there. She was working at a Church of Scientology place as a security guard. After a few weeks of having fun, we decided to get married for the hell of it. She knew my preference was for young boys and the gay life, but she did not care. So we took her dad's car to Las Vegas and got married. We drove to Mexico and lived there. However, I always drove back to San Diego and Hollywood to continue my prostitution for money. It was at this time that I called a family relative and asked for money. I was told that I had a trust fund and that I would be given a monthly allowance and a credit card. We built a house somewhere in Mexico and had 3 children. All boys. I had to leave them when my oldest turned 3 years old. I just could not handle the pressure of parenthood, changing diapers, and being responsible for another human being. It also cramped my lifestyle. I enjoyed traveling alone. So we divorced and now got everything, including money, every month to raise the boys. I still visited them several times a year, and they also visited me where I was. My ex-wife and I are still on very good terms. I spent 6 weeks with them in 2000. I traveled to Canada several times, of course. I always got into trouble and spent 60 days in a juvenile detention center, open and closed, and also spent several small 30 days or less for property crimes, same as the States. In 1992, I flew to Canada for my sister's second marriage. While here, I met a young boy that I found out was offering very young boys and girls for people. We started a very reasonable friendship. Through him, I met other people who did the same thing. When I wanted a boy, all I had to do was pick up the phone and call someone, and a boy would be ready to pick up or he would be dropped off. This lasted all summer in 1992. I moved to a small town and fell into a sexual relationship with a boy. I also had several other relationships during this time. All but 2 of the victims were 11 to 13. My friend and I went to a public pool and met an 11-year-old boy who was one of my friend's working boys. There was only one boy that all I wanted from him was to have oral sex performed upon him. This was the boy that was at a pool and on occasion had done with for my friend. I spent the night with him. He suggested that I try other things with him, as I was paying him. I let him perform oral sex on me for about 2 minutes, but could not get aroused or even an erection. Then we decided on anal intercourse, but again, I could not get aroused or even excited about the process. All I could think about was that this would hurt him, and it did not interest me. As stated in court, I could not get an erection during the process of my crime. Therefore, what was I really after? All I was after was that I needed to feel wanted. I know the boy thought there was something wrong with him when I could not get aroused, and he told me so. I told him that he was a very beautiful boy, but I am only interested in giving pleasure of oral sex to boys, nothing else, and that it was not his fault. The next day I took him shopping and bought clothes and other stuff for him and his family. This is how I was caught, because I used my own checks and credit cards to pay for the purchases and left the receipts in the store's own special bags. I was also charged with 4 other boys. These were my friends' boys, who I paid for sex. Some charges were withdrawn due to lack of evidence, so I ended up with only 3 boy victims. Here is what I wanted from them. Crimes and impact. In regards to all my victims, my like of boys is not entirely a sexual idea. I find boys to be non-judgmental, very good listeners, not aggressive, kind, caring, compassionate, and with no ulterior motives in what they do. I also find boys more willing to show affection, hugging and willing to keep you company. At first I would feel bored with myself, then lonely. When I became lonely, I needed companionship. I have always felt very comfortable around young boys. If I was going to do something wrong or did something wrong, I would not listen to an adult. However, if a child explained things to me, or if I was angry and upset, 90% of the time I would listen to the boy and do as he says. It has been said over the years that I have never matured emotionally, so my emotional level is that of a child. However, that being said, I can cope in the adult world exceptionally well in terms of business practices and have been known to have intellectually stimulating conversations with people. I am always aware of any and all international politics and world economies. I am also a strategist. I will formulate a plan and do everything to accomplish it. The downfall being, there are times when I plan for unreasonable acquisitions or plans. Anyways, getting back to my offenses, I would call a friend and ask him to provide me with a boy for the day or weekend. The boy would come over or I would meet him somewhere. The prearranged price would be paid at the time. However, there are some friends I keep a current balance with, and money is deducted this way. After meeting with the intended boy, we would always go to a restaurant and talk and eat for a while. The kid's discussions would normally include what I wanted from him while he was with me. My requests are always the same, so I'll say them now. I would ask for companionship, for him to at least pretend to be my friend and act like he really liked me and cared about me. That he listened to everything I wanted to talk about, even if it did not interest him. That he makes me the center of his world while we are together. That he shows affection towards me, not sexual, but rather like an older brother. And then I would tell him that in return for this, I would do the following. I would take him to fancy restaurants, movies of his choice, shopping for anything he wanted at my expense. We would spend the day together like true friends, and then at night, when we got to my place and he was either getting prepared to go home or stay the weekend, I would perform oral sex for him to show that I really appreciated his company and that I liked him as a friend, what they probably think or act now. I believe now that my victims felt like the following: ashamed of what they were doing, feeling that they have to do this to please others, that this may be the only way to be loved by a man, suicidal, feeling that they are in a no-win situation and may not be able to say no to others who only want to use them for sex, alone, thinking that they are the only ones doing this. They may take constant showers because they keep feeling the man on them, or may even feel that the man left something in them and they want it off, but no matter how many showers and scrubbing they do, they still feel dirty and unclean. Confused, belief that this is the only way to show love. Anger. They bottle their anger up about what's happening to them, or what they're being forced to do, until they explode. They feel that they may have done something to deserve this stuff that's happening to them. They feel they must do this to please their friends who may be threatening them or their family. But I think their biggest fear is, what if this guy is a wacko and intends to kill them? I received 15 months for my victims and a 16-month sentence for abduction. I was charged with abduction because I did not have his parents' consent to have him. Once released, my Canadian company, called CPS, had been open for only about a year. I met a man in jail who told me about the problems he was having obtaining his infant son. I told him I could help him. He did not know what I was in jail for. I worked with the courts and police to get his son back. I succeeded in this task, and we got a court order granting him sole custody, so we used the police to apprehend the child from his mother, who was psychologically unbalanced. We got to the house with police, went into the apartment, and while the police dealt with her, she was holding a knife. I was told to search the house for the boy. I found him and removed him from the house into a waiting car with the father in it. He had immediately left. They left the 8-year-old girl in my car. The police finally came out, and I followed the police back to the station where the father was waiting there. The police would not let us leave until we had a baby seat, so a hospital was called, and I and the girl went to pick it up. This was about 12 a.m. When we got back to the station, the crazed mother was there waving a knife at me in the car. I locked the door and honked my horn till the police came out. We were walked into the police station, into the back room. We stayed there till about 3 a.m., when the police saw the woman had left. We got into our car. The girl is mine, just down the road. I played the distractor when the mother had showed up. I used my car as a physical barrier between us and the baby. The police were following, and then the van turned into a gas station to get ahead of me. I pulled around and she tried to ram my car. The police pulled her over. The other car with the infant was gone on ahead. It took us about 1.5 hours to get to her place. We got inside the apartment when the mother showed up with a knife and tried to gain access to the apartment. I used my body weight against the door while he called the police. She was sent away from the property. I stayed out in my car to provide protection for the apartment. In the morning, I drove back to my common-law's apartment. This was just a business arrangement. She needed money, and I needed a family to look good for my investors before going public. That night, about 1 a.m., the father called me and asked me to pick up his daughter for 1 week till things cooled down. So my common-law and I drove 1.5 hours to pick her up, and another 1.5 hours back while she was at the apartment. I took her shopping. I locked my keys in the car, so I went to the police station in the mall and left the girl in their care while we decided on how to get my keys out. About 2 hours later, a tow truck came and got my keys out. I picked up the girl, who was having a blast with the police. The next day I took her to Canada's Wonderland. When we got back, the father had called. I called him back and he told me he knew what I was in jail for and was coming to get his daughter, and that he would deal with me. I panicked and took the girl with me. I did not know what to do, so I bought a tent and we spent the night camping. During the night, I asked her to perform oral sex on me. She refused, so I went to sleep. In the morning, I took her to a mall and sent her back home. I gave the taxi driver my business card with my name, address, and telephone number. I was arrested in Nova Scotia and charged with numerous sexual offenses against the girl. During the trial, the medical examiner proved the girl was still a virgin, both anally and vaginally, so all charges but the invitation was left. I was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years. At the same time, I was accused of having oral sex with an 8-year-old boy. I pleaded guilty to this. However, it was not him I was doing, but rather another boy, and he caught us together. But I cannot go into this in order to protect myself from criminal charges. The 8-year-old boy blackmailed us. In his statement to police, the last line he said was, "When do I get my $5,000? All my crimes, except the sexual ones, were done for thrills. I enjoyed getting everything I could for free, or I just enjoyed stealing cars and driving them everywhere. Once I was released, I was arrested and transported to Toronto to sign an 810.1 peace bond. I signed it knowing full well that in a few hours I would be on my way to Mexico. I was arrested in Mexico for not making a phone call to the police and not having an address in Canada. I was given 1 year for not making a phone call. I was released once again, and my passport was seized so that I could not leave the country. While staying in Toronto, I met several street people. I bought them meals, clothing, and rented them motel rooms to stay in. I met 2 boys who said they were 16 and showed me identification to verify it. I showed them my peace bond and explained who I was. The street people had already told them. I bought the 2 boys food and clothes. I rented them a hotel room for 2 days. The first night I stayed with the street people and the 2 boys in the hotel room. Everyone took showers. When the boy was taking a shower, they left to go get a coffee across the street. I was watching TV, so I stayed. They called the police, and when the police arrived, the boy was getting dressed. I was fully dressed. I was arrested. while they went through the boy's ID. They said that if everything checked out, I would be released right away. It turned out the boy was 13, 1 week from turning 14. There was no sex between us, but I was hoping that there might be later on. I was convicted of being with a minor under 14 and sentenced to 1 year. I spent the first 4 years fighting the system, not willing to change. Finally, after an incident in which pictures were found in my bunk, I settled down and concentrated on my program. I did very well, which was a real surprise to me, but I still had some rough spots. I left the program at my warrant expiry date. With media attention at its highest, I moved into a motel in Scarborough. There I met a lady with 3 boys, aged 6 months, 3 years, and 5 years. The mother comes over to my place to play cards a lot. I told her not to bring her kids. She did not. Every morning I would go over for coffee and spend about 15 minutes. I played with the children. I was then asked to take her friend and her 5-year-old son to the flea market to pick up some things. I did this, and I told my probation officer, and he said that there was no problem. He lied. He called the cops and pulled my probation. I found out through some sources that fled to BC. I was caught there. However, I hated the cops and was wondering what I could do to piss them off and to do more work. So I had an idea. I would make a rape kit. I bought duct tape, KY jelly, and gloves, and put them in a small backpack. When I was caught, they found the stuff. They did freak at first, till they realized that everything was still in its original packaging. So that did not work the way I thought it would. I was convinced of not being with an approved adult when I was around children, and fleeing to BC. I was given 3 years. Since then I went to the Royal Ottawa Hospital to undergo testing for my sexual preferences. After 8 hours of testing, I was told that I like older women and children only a little. I did not like the results. I had my program officer get me tested again. However, the only test we did was pictures of children only. No adults, and no children under 5, and no older than 13 years old. The test results came back boys 5 to 13. It was a setup. I know I prefer boys 11 to 13 years. I also like older men, 16 to 25. And I like the company of men 15 to 70. Now my psychologist says I should just touch on my companies. I own several companies. This, along with my allowance, allows me to live my life the way I want. I enjoy traveling and do so at every chance I get, but I will never come back to Canada. I am in this program to learn how to control my sexual impulses towards children and understand more about myself and why I do what I did. I have been told that some of my abuse in early years has caused me several problems in my life as a teenager and adult. It has caused me to act as a 10-year-old child to an adult. As you all know, I bounce in and out of this state every day. I also have an inability to form close friendships or relationships with men or women. It has caused me to bottle my feelings and all my anger, and that by growing up in several countries with different morals and attitudes towards sex, it has warped my thinking towards children. I have no social ties or friends in Canada. However, in other countries, I have a lot of acquaintances and family. Fantasy life did not revolve around sexuality. Instead, it formed around characters on TV or in books that looked like they were enjoying their family life. I wanted to be them, so in my fantasies, I became them. Only since coming to jail, prison, has my fantasy life began to include young boys. Porn of young boys also became a major part of my personal life. As far as authority figures, such as psychologists, doctors, police, or anyone in charge of children, I have a very strong dislike for them. I also do not like people in authority over me. I know most of my problems, and now I learn how to deal with them. It took me a long time to really look hard at myself, to figure out my problems, to identify them, and realize that they were really a problem. Not just because someone says it's a problem. I need to find out these things for myself. While here, I hope to learn social skills, economics, how to live without depending on everyone else to do things for me, schooling, anger management, and to try to deal with my life, upgrade my schooling, and to raise my self-esteem. Peter Whitmore's brother read the autobiography, and he wasn't sold on his account on the events as they went down. As his brother put it, most of the things he mentioned are not true, although he may have gone over them so much that he's actually started to believe that they were true. He was especially keen to set the record straight about Peter's claim that he was raped by his brother. If this had happened, it would have been brought to someone's attention. I didn't really associate with the others since I had my own friends and hung out with them. If he was orally assaulted by me, then there would be something he remembers about the description of my private parts, since I am not normal down there. His brother has disputed everything Peter has said about his early childhood. I'm going to leave you with an interview given by one of Peter Whitmore's victims, Zachary Miller. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.
Whitewood, Saskatchewan. It's an inconspicuous small town surrounded by miles and miles of open flat lands and farms. It's where Peter Whitmore put into play one of his most horrific crimes.
I was chained to a metal bed frame, and the chain was so tight around my leg that I still have scars from it.
It was Zachary Miller, Zach, who Whitmore brutalized and sexually assaulted. He was only 10. This is the first time Zach has told his full story in public. It was July 30th, 2006, and Zach's parents scheduled a playdate for him with a new kid in town. A teenager who had just moved here with his supposed uncle, Peter Whitmore.
We take off for a bike ride and we decide to go to a place about 2 miles from here, abandoned farmyard.
The boys make their way to the abandoned farm and head straight to the old garage to explore.
Next thing I know, something grabs me from behind, my mouth gets duct taped, get something put over my head, and I get thrown in a van.
Are you screaming, or are you... Why?
No point in screaming. No one's gonna hear you.
The van finally stops at a vacant house roughly 20 minutes away. All is quiet.
I get taken out of the van, I get a dog leash put on me, and I get dragged into an old abandoned farmhouse that has all the doors nailed shut, all the windows are closed up, and I just kept thinking about my family and if I'd ever see them again. I kept wondering why this would happen to me, because this doesn't happen to people.
We were terrified. We were terrified for our son. We were just praying that they would find them soon.
It had been hours since Pam and Lyle Miller had last seen their son. Overcome with worry, Pam called the police.
2 different officers showed up later in the evening and brought a picture, and Lyle identified him right off the bat.
Well, that's one part that makes me mad to this bloody day. I met him, he had a flat tire.
You helped him out.
Yeah, fixed lots of tires.
Lyle had met Whitmore before, 7 days earlier, when Whitmore showed up at the farm unexpectedly. The Millers had a sign at the edge of their driveway advertising eggs for sale, so they were used to strangers coming in and out.
When he came in the yard, he only saw a bunch of kids. Maybe that's what sparked the first thing in his brain, was there's all these kids here.
Whitmore introduced himself as Robert Summers, an alias, and with him, a 14-year-old boy. Whitmore told the Millers the boy was his nephew. But in fact, Whitmore had abducted that boy days earlier in Winnipeg and brought him to Saskatchewan.
He's very amicable, nice guy, smooth talker. Had a lie ready for everything.
So So the man that had identified himself to you as Rob Summers, you now know to be
Peter Whitmore, one of Canada's most notorious pedophiles.
One of Canada's most notorious pedophiles. But at the time, Lyle had no idea who Whitmore was. Whitmore would go on to visit the farm 2 more times, hoping to gain the family's trust. He went back the next day and suggested that his nephew and Zach hang out. So a playdate was arranged. When Whitmore was leaving, his van popped a tire. So Lyle invited Whitmore and the boy to stay for dinner before he fixed the flat.
We all sat there and ate. And the other boy, he sat in the living room, didn't eat. We offered him food, but he wouldn't let him have food. And we really thought that was weird.
And you offer him food, and Whitmore says...
He actually had complete control of that boy. We didn't know that at the time, but that'd be the truth. This was completely premeditated.
It was all part of Whitmore's scheme. He was going to force his fake nephew to help take Zach. Whitmore's 3rd visit to the farm, he dropped off his nephew for the playdate. It was the final step in Whitmore's trap.
Offenders are masters at manipulation and exploitation. They are very adept at not only seeing opportunities to exploit, but creating those opportunities.
Michael Burke is the chief psychologist for the United States Marshals Service and the chief of its Behavioral Analysis Unit. He has spent almost 2 decades trying to find out the motivations behind the crimes of some of the most devious sexual predators in the world.
Individuals with whom I've worked who are similar to Mr. Whitmore are among the worst of the worst. This is an individual who thrives and enjoys destroying human beings. He's an extraordinarily high-risk individual.
Can you talk us through what happened next?
Well, he repeatedly raped me for hours on end, and once he was satisfied with what he did, he put me to work cleaning things. I've tried to fight him off, but he would just beat me till basically senseless. During the nights, I couldn't sleep, and I still chained to a bed with maybe a couple crackers. Mice would come up out of the vents at night, and I would share what little food I had with them, because being raised on a farm, animals always come first. And they kind of give you a little bit of courage and strength to keep going.
You're just a hopeless wreck. But that morning, you still have to get up and do things. You have to take care of the animals.
It had been more than 24 hours. Zach was still gone, and the couple was crumbling under the weight of their anguish.
We lived for hearing from the police, waiting to hear, waiting for the next report, just waiting and waiting.
So you started thinking that this may be it.
This man is obviously doing horrible things to our child, and if he's going to kill him, do it fast. Don't make him suffer.
Individuals like Mr. Whitmore would fall into the category of enjoying the distress and enjoying the control and the humiliation, the degradation that comes from fully dominating another human being.
It's often difficult to determine exactly what drives violent sexual offenders. But in Whitmore's case, his crimes are so egregious that Burke believes he's a sadist.
Individuals who are interested in destroying a child's psyche. As one offender told me, I wanted to destroy her soul. These are individuals who are motivated by something much more profound. And you can't dispel that through treatment or through medication or through some surgery.
There wasn't a person in Whitewood that wasn't terrified, each praying that Zach was still alive. Friends, families, and neighbors were searching high and low for signs of the boy. A break finally came when a nearby farmer spotted fresh tracks leading to the house where Zach was being held captive.
He come to check his land because of what was going on in the news, and he seen tire tracks in a abandoned farm yard where there's not supposed to be tire tracks. So he rushes back and phones the police.
Give me your perspective, though, from inside that farmhouse. Whitmore sees the cops, he hears the sirens, there's helicopters. He realizes
he's caught.
He's busted.
It was the moment Zach had been hoping for. Whitmore dragged the boys to an old shed on the property while the RCMP surrounded the place. Zach says he started hacking away at the duct tape binding his hands with a blade he found in the dirt.
I managed to pick up an old hacksaw blade, I guess, out of the dirt. I cut the boundings on my hands. I kind of got my hands behind my back, and as soon as he got turned away from the door, I took off towards the door. I ran straight for the nearest police car, and I fell in about 3 gopher holes, dove through a fence, and yeah, came up to an RCMP officer.
This is incredible. This is terrifying.
It is terrifying.
This is a horror movie.
It's the most realistic horror movie I've ever seen.
After 2 days, Zach was finally safe. He had been abused and tortured. There wasn't a piece of his body that wasn't battered or bruised. Zach was taken away for immediate medical help, and Whitmore was arrested.
I can't describe the first moment. I was quite relieved, but there's still that little bit of dread lacking in the back of your head about what happened. At the moment, it didn't really matter.
Around 11 a.m., the Millers got the news. Zach's alive. Their son had been found.
Tell me about that moment where you...
I just felt guilty. It was my fault because my mother was crying. I somehow did this to her. I'm sorry. Sorry that I was missing for those days. That I put you guys through this much.
He said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dad."
What did that mean?
He already blamed himself.
I just started crying. And I don't even remember what I said. I don't even remember what Zachary said. It was just the relief knowing that he was alive.
Did you think you were going to die there?
At many points, yes. He threatened me. He held a gun to me. He's cut me, beat me. He's choked me. Many points I thought it was the end. But my stubbornness, I just wasn't going to let him win, though. Even though it cost me more pain, I just didn't quite give in to him. I just did what I had to do to survive.